Yeah, ma'am here, ma'am here. Ma'am here, ma'am, this side, ma'am, this side.
At the road
Ma'am, this side, ma'am, this side, ma'am, ma'am, this side.
Okay.
Ma'am, can you back side?
I need my glasses now.
Ma'am, can you back side? Ma'am.
Okay.
Excuse me, can we please? Because they have all listened. now it's all over.
It's all over.
Please, it's starting. Program is starting.
Okay, I think we should start without.
Let us start the meeting. And I have a request to make before I start the meeting that all photographers may clear the place. Today's theme is war on people. That's not anything new.
Please.
Since the beginning of history, there have been wars on people, probably even before the history began. But we are specific. When we say war on people, we mean the wars started by the government of India after the British left. One of the first things which the Indian state did was to send the military to Nagaland. When the people from Nagaland came here, we called them Chinese, we called them Burmese, we never called them Indians, but the land belonged to us. So we sent army to occupy the land, which extended over northeast very soon. I'm making some wild strokes, I will not go into the details. Then came 1987. There was an alliance between the Congress led by Rajiv Gandhi and National Conference led by Farooq Abdullah. They put up candidates. In normal course, I have been in Kashmir, so I can say very authentically, all the candidates put up by the alliance would have lost their deposit. All of them, with no exception. I'm talking about the Kashmir Valley, not Jammu. The people who contested against them were called United Muslim Front. All the candidates should have won with a thumping majority if the election was fair, but it was rigged. All of them, all the candidates of the United Muslim Front lost a deposit, while all the candidates put up by the Congress and the National Conference won with almost unanimous votes. That was the last straw on the camel's back. All of them left Kashmir Valley and went to Azad Kashmir. It is they who started Hizbul Mujahideen, not ISI, not by Pakistanis, but by Kashmiris who were born in the villages and towns of Kashmir. Now, the Indian Army has moved to the heart of India. There's a vast forest region in the central India. It extends over several states. Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh. Then there are areas, forest areas in Jharkhand, parts of Bihar, parts of Orissa, parts of Bengal. There is a concentration of Adivasis there, tribals, indigenous people. They are the first people who came to India from Africa, the first human beings, the first Homo sapiens. They have been staying there ever since they came here for millennia. But some 200 years ago, the Indian state started to make laws which ultimately culminated in declaring all forests belong to the Indian state, which rendered them illegal occupants, trespassers, encroachers. They could be evicted. These areas are very, very rich in minerals, in ores. the government has entered into contracts, memorandums of understanding with some 100 companies, transnationals, multinationals, monopolies. Each of them wants 200 villages, 250 villages, 225 villages. So the Indian state has sent their armed forces, some 200,000 police and 100,000 paramilitary forces. And now they say they will send the military itself. And their force, what will their force do? Will they drop napalm bombs Americans did in Vietnam? But the Viet Cong survived even napalm bombs, even the army. So there is a war. It is a civil war. It is against the tribals who refuse to leave the forest regions. They resist. Sometimes the resistance turns violent. There are several incidents which we have read in the newspapers. One of them was that a bus which carried civilians were blasted. It was not just a bus, it was a convoy. There were 3 trucks, 2 buses, and 1 jeep. There were 100 policemen. 20 of them were regular police, and 80 of them were SPOs, special police officers. That's a euphemism. They are members of Salva Judam, a vigilante organization, which was specially organized by the Indian state to kill Maoists who lead the tribals and the tribals who support them. On the previous night, they had gone to the forests, searching the Maoist activists, searching the tribals who supported them. They couldn't get them. But then they went to some place and killed 3, and they were on their way back. In the bus, there was 20 commandos who had killed those 3 people. They were targeted, but they had kept some civilians in it as a shield. Civilians were also killed. And recently, we have heard of a train blast. The train derailed, and it was hit by a goods train. The PCPA, People's Committee Against Police Atrocities, has denied it. They have denied it several times. They have also offered their protection to the trains which will run in those areas. But the government keeps on insisting that it was done by PCPA, People's Committee Against Police Atrocities. Even Mamata Banerjee denies it. We have today, there are 2 speakers. Both of them have been in the battlefield. They have spent a few weeks there. They will speak to you today. Gautam Navlakha, he has almost been a Bombayite. He has stayed in Bombay several years as one of the editors of Economic and Political Weekly. Then Arundhati Roy. You all know her as much as I know her. So it will be preposterous that I introduce her to you. This meeting will be Teltumle. Over to Anand Teltumle.
In 1848, Marx and Engels wrote in Communist Manifesto, the executive of modern state is but a committee for organizing common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. Indeed, state has been working for the interests of the dominant classes ever. Capitalism is a bug-ridden system. and it threw up a big bug in the form of Great Depression in 1929, which required a Keynesian patch to save capitalism. It saved capitalism all right, but it camouflaged the basic character of the state and created an illusion of something like relative autonomy. Many intellectuals kept on imagining and debating over two streams of autonomies: reproductive autonomy and transformative autonomy. In short term, the practice corroborated it, but in long term, this Marxian dictum in manifesto actually held true. Keynesian patch worked all right for a few decades, but this bug was still keeping on appearing. And by 1980s, it could no more be managed by any patch. They released a new version called neoliberalism, a neoliberal globalization in common parlance. This neoliberalism actually bared the true character of the state. It removed that illusion of autonomy, etc., and bared the true character of the state. The state assumed naked instrumentality for dispossessing people for capitalist accumulation. What is happening in Chhattisgarh, what is happening in Jungle Mahal, what is happening in Kalinganagar or elsewhere is basically exhibition of this bare character of the state. This state has unleashed a virtual war against people, virtual war on people, and that is the topic of today's meeting. Whether this war is being fought with the visual weapons of police, paramilitary, or military tomorrow, or invisible weapons of public policy like SEZs and RTE, Right to Education Act for that matter. This is also a weapon. It is a war on people. We may confuse ad infinitum the issues, the complex issues involved in that, but this war is there to be seen by anyone. It just needs the pro-people attitude and pro-people vision. We have two speakers here, two public intellectuals at that, who have been endowed with this vision in full measure. They do not require any introduction, and without taking much time, I would invite Gautam Navlakha to deliver his speech. Thank you.
I'd like to thank CPDR for giving me this opportunity to share my view on what all of us know is one of the most gravest issues that confronts us. It's the war against our people. I'm not going to take too much of time. I know that a lot of you have come here to listen to Arundhati, so I'll try and run through what I have to say to enable her to speak to you. Let me start by, I'm also slightly nervous because each time I get up to speak, I don't know whether I'll make sense. Let me begin by pointing out that this meeting that has been called, which is on the topic of the war against our people, if I were to open my mouth and come out in support of the Maoist, I can be hauled up under Section 39 of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and the organizers of the meeting can also be picked up. So we are obviously, in a way, in a manner of speaking, throwing a challenge also to the state. Of course, the Home Ministry came out with a statement and made it very clear, and they've explained what they mean by it by saying that anybody who speaks in favor of Maoists can be hauled up against Section 39 for supporting the Maoists. The Prime Minister, it was very nice of Dr. Manmohan Singh to come out and explain what he felt. He said that in democracy everyone is entitled to express their views and should face no restrictions so long as they do not engage in advocacy for violence. So this is like an endorsement. I mean, this is like a support for me that I can speak my mind. Except there is a caveat. So long as they do not engage in advocacy for violence. On the face of it, Prime Minister's remark is an endorsement, okay, for freedom of expression. But what does he mean when he says that so long as they do not engage in advocacy for violence? Does support for use of violence by state fall within this caveat? Does support for structural violence, such as advocating retaining the present status quo or maintaining the status quo, which involves structural violence and slow genocide, is that permitted? Does right to resist oppression or right to self-defense, does it apply, or can I be held up? If I advocate overthrow of the state and a transformation of state and society by peaceful means if possible, but armed if necessary, will I be hauled up? Well, I leave it to the authorities to make up their mind, and if they do decide to act against CPDR and us, well, so be it. Because time has come for us to actually raise certain fundamental issues. And I'm really actually, to begin with, we should all be very angry. We should all be very angry because for 63 years, we have done nothing when the state has declared war against our people. We have taken it in our stride. You take a poll here, 99% of the people will vote in favor of peaceful transformation or against violence. Right? But how many of us have dared raise fundamental issues about what our state has been doing since 1947, since the transfer of power? There's not a single year in the last 63 that we have had since the transfer of power when the state has not been engaged in a war in one or the other part of this country. Today we have landed up in 2010, as I speak, 22 districts in Jammu and Kashmir, 79 districts in Northeast, and 34 districts according to the Government of India, where some form of armed conflict is going on. 235 districts out of 636, there is an armed conflict going on. Does it matter to us? No. I think we are the biggest hypocrites. I pardon my saying so, we are the biggest hypocrites. We talk about peace, we talk about non-violence, we talk about peaceful transformation, we are against political violence and everything, but we don't mean it. I'm sorry we don't mean it, because if that had been so, we would be out on the streets. We would be out on the streets protesting against, for the last 63 years, for the wars that our state has launched against our people. And every year that the war has been launched, we have been quiet, because we accept war. Look at it. The corporate media has accepted that the train blast, one can never condone any attack on civilians. Let me begin with this caveat. But we don't know the truth. There are a lot of problems with it. Trinamool Congress would like to believe that it's CPM's hand behind it. I don't know. CPM and others to believe that it's the Maoist hand behind the train blast. We don't know the truth. The investigations are still going on, and even if the West Bengal CID comes out, there'll be a lot of question marks. Why? Because of the past and recent past. It's the same CID which came out, which was involved in, by the way, in the Rizwanur. I mean, that had nothing to do with political violence and the issue of Maoist insurgency and things like that. It was a simple case of a Muslim boy marrying a Hindu girl, right? The role of the CID was no different then. They were pretty convinced that Rizwanur was guilty as hell, and that he committed suicide when he was found out. Chhatrar Mahato, when he was arrested, the DG of police of West Bengal had come out in public, in press conference, declared that Chhatrahar Mahato, who was the leader of PCPA, had admitted that he has an insurance worth more than 1 crore and he owns at least 3 to 4 houses in West Bengal, Orissa and Jharkhand. 3 months later, the police declared that they had found no evidence, and that his insurance is worth no more than 50,000, a little more than that, between 50,000 and 1 crore. But these kind of exaggerations do happen. Police do plant stories. When there is a war going on against the Maoists, there would be an attempt and attributing every crime that is committed, every war crime that is committed to them. It doesn't mean that they're lily white and pure. No. They have committed crimes. But the issue that we have to raise is, and go beyond these crimes that get committed, we have to ask fundamental questions. Why is it the Indian state takes recourse to war? Why? What is it that is driving them? And what is it that allows them to wage war with nobody raising question and nobody giving a damn? I mean, just look at it. In Kashmir, so much has happened. And until 2008, we had declared, we were telling and preaching the Kashmiris, give up your armed resistance, give up militancy, and the Indian middle classes and the Indian intelligence and the Indian political elite will accept and start negotiating and accept whatever you want to, whatever are your demands. What happened? No sooner they gave up their armed militancy, the Indian middle class, the corporate media, the political elite turned and showed their back and said, now normalcy has been restored. Brilliant, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Killings can take place, rapes can take place, disappearances can take place. We remain unmoved. We are non-violent. So we can't even get shaken by all these violent crimes that are committed in our name in Jammu and Kashmir or Northeast and today in the 7 states of what is central India. It doesn't really matter to us. So it is an utter lie when we say that we Indians by tendency, by natural inclination, believe in non-violence. I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't believe in it, I don't subscribe to it. There is no evidence to support it beyond the point. Because nobody has been able to, if we were so opposed to it, then we would have managed to stop these wars from taking place in our country and addressing these issues as they deserve to be addressed across the table through negotiations in a democratic and just manner. Right of self-determination is an inalienable right. Heavens are not going to fall if you grant that right, if you respect that right for people in Jammu and Kashmir and for Northeast. But we won't do that. We would like to crush them. How dare you think in terms of destroying and disintegrating Mother India that we have grown up with? I'm sorry. If we cannot accept peaceful political resolutions of crisis, people will pick up arms. You may not like it, you may like to condemn it, doesn't matter. They will, and they will fight. Now what the hell are we going to do about it? This is what confronts us today. You may like Maoist, you may not like it, it doesn't matter. They're there. You can't turn your back, you can't forget it. Government of India has declared that they're the single biggest threat to internal security. What are you going to do about it? Wipe them all out? And who are these Maoists? Who are these Maoists? Have they dropped from heaven? Have they come from Mars? Have they come from somewhere outside? Have they traveled in boats and landed in the Indian shores? No. These are like people like you and me. They are Indians. The point is, what position do we take? How do we look upon it? How do we look upon this war, this latest war that has been foisted on us by Government of India? Please make no mistake. It has been claimed, and a lot of well-meaning people also believe, that Maoists have brought this upon themselves. Why? Because they believe in violent overthrow of the system. Is that right? Is that really correct? Is that how this movement began? Is this what we know of 43 years? I mean, they have been with us for 43 years. Is this what we know of this movement? I think it's time, now that this war has been foisted, for us to devote little time, energy, and shed some sweat to try and understand what has happened in the last 43 years. What? Why? Why has armed revolution become something which became acceptable? Which was it was an argument which could be persuasively advocated, and people could be convinced of it within the party. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen unchallenged. It didn't happen without debate and discussions. There are moments through which this movement has gone. In 71, when the Eastern Command deployed 45,000 of Indian soldiers in West Bengal to crush the Naxalites, what did they have at that point? What weapons did they possess? Shivraj Patil, the much abused Home Minister, much maligned also. I like him for just one single reason: he did nothing. I was very happy with that. He did nothing. Sometimes not doing anything is actually serving a purpose. On the Naxal issue, he did not do anything. Thank God for it. But anyway, he is known to have made a statement on the floor of Parliament on 1st March 2006, very laid out. He said when the Naxals began, all that they had were axes, some country pistols, and maybe a rifle or two. Over the years, they've amassed different weapons. In 71, this is what they had. They didn't have AK-47s, they did not have IEDs, they did not have mortars or rocket launchers or any such thing. But 45,000 Eastern Command soldiers had to be deployed. Why? Because anybody who challenges the system, and were they at all in a position to challenge and overthrow the system in 1971? The most ardent supporters of Naxalbari movement would not believe that that was possible in 1960s and 1971. And please remember that the Naxalbari movement began in 1966 after a gap of 14 years. For 46 to 52, the Telangana struggle was on, which was crushed with the help of military. That was the first war launched by the government of India against our people. It was in Telangana. From 52 to 66 is a record of 14 years of not a single violent struggle launched by the communist revolutionaries. It's in 66, failing to achieve land reform. Land was the issue. That section of the CPM membership revolted. That is the history. You and I, some of us may believe in armed overthrow, but our belief doesn't matter. Are we capable of doing it? That is the question we have to pose. In 1960s and 70s, they were not in a position yet, and nobody protested against it. We are Indians, non-violent. It didn't matter to us if few hundred, 13,000, 20,000, 30,000 people die. People die in this country after all. Now, how does it matter if 30,000 Naxals or youth were killed? It doesn't bother us. Hypocrites as we are, I believe. And I'm very angry. Let me tell you, I get damn mad when I think about our culpability. The way in which we have actually acquiesced in all these wars that the government has launched against our people. We have acquiesced in it. We are guilty as hell. And when Kashmiris privately share their anger with us, they share their hatred also. And I quite understand it. If I was so hated, they don't hate the Indian state as much as the India's intelligentsia and its good people who preach but do nothing. Only preach non-violence, peaceful recourse. What have we achieved? After 63 years, 47% of children in the age of 0 to 6 suffer from malnutrition, malnourishment and stunted growth. 47% of the next generation. Is that criminal or not? Is that violence or not? Is that slow genocide or not? What are we saying about that violence? It doesn't bother us because we don't see it. It's a slow, gradual death. With a sleight of hand, you change the calorie parameters. lower it from 2,400 per person, you bring it down to 1,500, it means you are excluding hundreds of millions of people from Food Security Act through a simple sleight of hand. Nutritional requirement. Our academics and scholars can debate endlessly, and they engaged in debate about whether nutritional intake should matter in determining poverty. They forget the basics. That in moving away, they also exclude hundreds of millions from whatever little security that they can avail of through Food Security Act as and when it is passed. 100 families own 25% of India's national income. It doesn't bother us. That's okay. That's really okay. And rest of 80% survive on rupees 20. That's also okay because it's not us. It's not the people like us. How does it matter? We'll debate non-violence and violence. We will refuse to take a position. We'll condemn the Maoist, right, left or center, whether they deserve it or not. Most of the time, we are willing to even jump to conclusions. Condemn even without any proof. This is not to say that we should be silent where crimes are committed by them. No, that's not the point I'm making. I'm just saying that there is a natural tendency. If you honestly look inside and ask yourself, you will find in that honest moment of reflection that yes, what I'm saying is not an exaggeration. There is an element of truth in it. At least grant that. But let me come back to the subject of war, because this is war we are confronted in. What does it mean? Chidambaram says that this is not a war. That the term war and enemy is not used by me, it's being used by the Maoist. Condemn them. Don't condemn me. I'm confused. I'm confused because what does it mean when 75 central paramilitary forces of CRPF, BSF, ITBP, Seema Suraksha Bal, and now there is discussion with the army through setting up of a new force along the lines of Rashtriya Rifles, which was created for Jammu and Kashmir. A new force. I'm told that it would be called, I don't know whether this is true, which would be proficient in rural and jungle warfare, is going to be set up. But 75 paramilitary forces, 75 battalions of paramilitary forces, roughly about 80,000 well-trained military. Now please understand one thing, paramilitary formations are organized along the lines of army's infantry formations, okay? This is the history, I mean, we must know. There is a big difference. Even if you call it police, it's actually not police. Police is the civil police. The armed police and the central paramilitary forces are trained in a different way. The mandate is very different. Now they have been deployed along with an equal, if not more, battalions of armed police of the states in these various states. In Chhattisgarh, for instance, there are 26 battalions of central paramilitary forces. About 30,000 armed police or constabulary, as armed constabulary as they are called. About 4,500 SPOs. So it's a huge force. And if you look at the districts where they have been deployed and where the war is at its maximum, Dantewada, Bijapur, Narayanpur, it's not in all the 7 districts of Chhattisgarh, it's, the war is being conducted at the same intensity. No, it's not like that. And in fact, even there are authorities who explain it. But if you take Dantewada and Bijapur, the combined population of Bijapur and Dantewada is 7.9 lakhs. 7.9 lakhs according to 2001 census. Now, if that is where the war is intense, and about 16 paramilitary formations are deployed there, that is including the state forces, it's a huge force. It's for 7.9 lakh people. These are armed. These are armed with very sophisticated weapons. Government of India and the media has this habit of crying that the Maoists are better armed. than the security forces. It's an utter lie. You have to read the Ministry of Home Affairs' own records to know that they lie to the truth. And we all believe it because it's a God, no? Sarkar, Hukumat, from whom this information has come to us. Until they deny it, we'll believe that they must be speaking the truth. That's an utter lie. You have to carefully read the Ministry of Home Affairs reports and the press handouts. Go to the website now. Mercifully, in this age of electronic media and websites and all, there are a lot of information which can't be hidden. One way or another, you get hold of it. They are well armed. And whatever weapons Maoists possessed, 90% of them, if not more, comes from the state armories. So it's not as if the Maoists have any different weapons than what the security forces possess. They got in Nayagarh 1,200 weapons. 300 of them were AK-47s, the rest were rifles. That is where they get their weapons from, no matter what the government of India says. And in fact, government of India is also this tendency of speaking lies in the public, but on the floor of the parliament, they have to be a little careful because you never know. Some maverick MP can raise a privilege issue that the minister has lied. So they have to be careful. So on the floor of the look at what statements they make on the floor of the parliament and you get an idea about what they're saying. On the floor of the parliament, they declare Maoists have no foreign links. They declare the bulk of the weapons are from looting the armories or in the ambushes when they collect the weapons. And it's only a small percentage of weapons or ammunition that they purchase. How else will they get it in any case? They're not going to be supplied weapons by China or Pakistan, and even if they are willing to, they're not going to take it. Please understand the political, ideological grounding of the Maoists to understand this basic fact. Anyway, the point is, very simply, that they are well armed, they are well equipped, they have now going to be provided helicopters. I mean, the war is going to escalate. And now when we are talking of the army, it's going to go up another notch. Army is trained to cause maximum damage. Paramilitary forces are trained to attack and kill. There is a slight difference, but the police is not. The police is supposed to enforce the law and only use force as a matter of self-defense. There's a big difference between the three categories that I'm talking about. Now, with the deployment and the likely deployment of the army or the ex-servicemen who have been trained or who have retired, who will form part of like the Rashtriya Rifles that was set up in Jammu and Kashmir, we are in for an escalation in the war. In Dantewada, as I said, that there are very high deployment of security forces because Dantewada and Bijapur are two districts where the forces are being concentrated and the war is being fought more intensively than other parts. These are also the areas where an embargo has been imposed. Now we all know that Bastar is malaria prone area, and now when the rainy season begins, and especially by July, August, when the food stocks of the villages decline, then the propensity to fall victim to malaria or to other ailments increases by leaps and bounds. Now, since this area has been encircled, medicines are not permitted to enter. Okay? Food stocks. If villagers want food or rations, they have to travel to the security camps where the ration shops have been shifted. The bazaar, the huts, the weekly bazaar and huts now take place in these war zones inside the security camps where they have to register themselves. Before reaching there, they have to pass through various security controls. And they must, now it has been declared that in all these areas, people must carry identity card. Well, you ask a Kashmiri or a Naga or a Manipuri, they'll tell you, well, they have lived with this for last 30, 40, 50 years. So what is so new for us? But it is something new for us. In central India, in 7 states, very soon, if you do not have an identity card, that could be considered a crime and you can be picked up. So you have embargo also, you have security forces. So everything is designed. I mean, what more do you want? to establish that this is war we are talking about, not a police action where the police tries to separate two rioting groups from killing each other, or intervene to prevent a crime from taking place, or to stop a mob from attacking someone, like we saw in 1984 in Delhi when the Congress mobs were killing the Sikhs, or we saw in Gujarat where the army was, of course, they were deployed late, but these are short-term deployments. They are not prolonged. They are not for a long length of time. Or in all these 236 districts, 235 districts, where the armed conflict is on, the deployment is for a longer period. It's not a short-term deployment where the magistrate has the power and the final authority to order opening of fire, things like that. In these areas, the security forces have the powers to decide on their own when to carry out an operation, what to do in an operation, as and when they have to open fire and so on. And it's a brutal war. Wars are always brutal. We shouldn't expect it to be any different. And civil wars in particular. Because it's so difficult to distinguish as the army. I mean, one of the reasons why the army was hesitant is because he said it's so difficult for us to distinguish between a Maoist and an Adivasi. So how will we manage? And then there are also Adivasis in the army. We'll create a problem of discipline in the force. They are scared, and they better be. But their being scared is not going to stop the government of India from deploying them as and when they feel it. Because if things are going bad, then they may bring them in. The point I'm trying to make is, the question we have to therefore come back to is, why this war? The Prime Minister had declared in January 2009 that the Maoists have modest capabilities. When you talk to the MHA people today, or the scribes who operate as only an extension of the Ministry of Home Affairs, you talk to them and they'll tell you, well, Government of India believes that even if they have modest capabilities, it has to be nipped in the bud right now, because if you allow them any more space, they'll continue to grow and expand. That's not true. Maoists have expanded when an offensive has been launched against them. Look at the history. In 1991, when the first Jan Jagran was launched in Chhattisgarh's Bastar area, what happened? The Maoists consolidated themselves. The second time around, when the Jan Jagran number 2 was launched in 1978-98, same thing happened. Third time, when Salva Judum was launched in 2005, what happened? Wars enable Maoists. So, I mean, at one level, I mean, as a joke, one can say that Mr. Chidambaram is actually a closet supporter of the Maoists, because he's doing precisely what the Maoists want him to do, to wage a war. Because they know they stand the best chance of expanding and consolidating their position when it's a war. Because people are angry in that area. You have to go and visit to see it. And it's not just in those areas, in all the tribal areas, in all the peasant belts. Either fighting over land rights, forests, or water. Look at the Ministry of Rural Development's report which came last year. The draft report, not the edited version, from which all the interesting portions were deleted. But look at the draft report. It's still available on the net. And I think it should become compulsory reading for all of us, because it will give you an idea about what we have done or not done in the last 63 years. The title is Unfinished Task of Land Reform. Read it and decide for yourself what an official document has to say about land reforms, about forest rights, about fifth schedule, about PESA, about variety of acts which were meant in our constitutional order of scheme of things, meant to protect the tribals and the poor, how they have actually operated on the ground. And why people are getting fed up. I mean, do you expect people in Kalinganagar to believe in the word of Government of India? Or do you want them to believe that their own experience suffices to convince them that without resisting POSCO and Tata, they'll get nowhere. And that unless they resist to believe in the goodwill and the good sense of Government of India or the state authority, will not get them what they want. This is the ground reality. They have not taken up arms. But the day is not very far when they'll feel that they have been left with no choice. I mean, if the police action can take place, go and demolish their houses, burn them, you're driving them, you're forcing them, you're compelling them to pick up arms. You're telling them that there is no other way. Either you surrender, give your land to the corporates that they are meant for as far as the state government is concerned, and the police acts on their behalf, or, well, your choice is devil in the deep blue sea. So either you pick up arms or you surrender. What do you expect people to do after 63 years? Really, what do you expect? What do we expect? We are middle class, we are well-to-do, we don't bother. It's not as if our food is going to be taken away from our table. It's not as if we'll be picked up tomorrow and put behind bars. No, our freedoms are not going to be affected. Our food, our salaries, our cushy life is not going to be affected. But what about the 80% of the population which comprise this country? What are they supposed to do? What do we tell them? We tell them fight elections. Ridiculous. For 15 elections have been fought in this country. 15 parliaments have been constituted. Are we to believe that people have voted in governments to keep them in poverty and oppressed? And this is what has been the major contribution? If I were to say this, Mr. Chidambaram is going to get angry. Mr. Chidambaram says that Maoists call Parliament a pigsty. But Maoists are not the only ones who call it. A lot of us should start doing it also. Because really, what have we achieved in 63 years? If it's not as if the glass is half full or half filled. No, I'm sorry. It's a question of 2/3 empty. It's a glass which is 2/3 empty because 80% of the population are at the receiving end. And it's their fight. They are resisting in their own small ways, either through small struggles. It's not necessary that all the struggles are being organized or led by the Maoists. No, not at all. In Kalinganagar, it's Abhay Sahu who belongs to CPI. Jagat Singhpur, it's Abhay Sahu who belongs to CPI. But you see the anger of people everywhere. And look at the positions that the people at these parties who have, or their leaders who are connected with the grassroots, who know what is happening at the grassroots level, who know the anger, they'll tell you. And it'll be very difficult to stop. So the question we have to ask is, when the state decides that military means is the only means in which to push through its policies and to crush those who challenge its policies or its authority in different parts, what do you expect people to do? In 1978 till 1978, the Maoists, the People's War Group, worked through mass organizations in Adilabad, Karimnagar and elsewhere. That is when they saw the success, the repression began. It is at that point that there was a big debate inside the party and the balance tilted in favor of picking up weapons and building, speeding up, setting up of squads. So it's not that anything happens in vacuum. It's not just that the Maoists are, right from the word go, believe in it. A lot of ML groups parted company and chose different path. But where have they landed up? What have they been able to achieve peacefully? I look at our next door neighbor, where the Maoists gave up and fought the election and emerged as the largest force. What does Government of India do in connivance with the Nepali army and the most reactionary parties? Does everything to thwart them from coming to power. And yet we believe that the Maoists should give up armed resistance and fight elections? Ridiculous. Ridiculous. The only way in which they can do it is if they learn the lesson from the Nepali Maoists of first establishing their strength, the military and political strength, use it as a bargaining position. Only then do they stand a chance. The whole state system remains the same in Nepal, despite the fact that the Maoists have 40% of the seats in the Constituent Assembly. They can't change it. The judiciary is the same, the bureaucracy is the same, the army is the same, the ethos is the same, the laws are the same, the rules are the same. And yet we believe things can change peacefully. I don't know which world we live in. I'm sorry, it can't be done. It cannot be done. That is the reality that our government forces us to accept. It's telling us again and again and again. And look at it. Do you think any of the major reforms that are taking place today under UPA 1 and UPA 2, please read the statements of political leaders. Please read the statements of the government leaders. Whether it is law, and Virappan Moily talking about law and judiciary and Govardhan, I think Govardhan case about the forest, where he says that it's because of that, the judgments by the Supreme Court that the Naxals have gained ground. The Prime Minister declares that because of the false cases foisted on the Adivasis in different parts of the country, this has driven the Adivasis into the fold of the Maoists. So withdraw the cases, and a beginning was made in Jharkhand. When the Forest Act was being debated or was being mooted, what was the argument that was coming from Congress party and the other parties? If you don't do it, then the Maoists will benefit. Maoists will gain ground. The spectacle of Maoists, the fear of Maoists is driving many of the reforms. You remove the Maoist, and I bet all our people who talk about reform and partial results will discover that the government of India has stopped bothering about them. That is the reality. That is the reality, unfortunate reality that we have been placed with. Whether I like Maoist or not, we have to accept that these are the realities that are being thrown at us. We can ignore it, or we can accept and then learn to accept it and therefore take consequence of it in understanding the war and taking a position, whatever position. I take a position in favor of the Maoists. Yes, I declare. I don't think I'm in violation of Unlawful Activities Act. It's the government of India which is in violation of its own constitution that it talks about. Having foisted a war in which the Adivasis are going to be killed and are being the targets because the land is needed by the corporations. And this is not just me saying. This is what the Ministry of Rural Development report said. They said that the Salva Judum was launched because Chhattisgarh government's attempts at signing MOUs and inviting mining corporations in 2000 met with resistance. And it was in order to create a rift amongst the Maria tribals that Salva Judum was envisaged and Salva Judum was created. And it was financed by Tata and SR. You don't expect any corporate media to say that. Their advertisement will stop. The truth is not going to come out from there. But here is an official document, a draft. Of course, the final report has removed this section. Because how can government of India accept something like that? It will go counter to its own. I mean, however liberal Dr. Manmohan Singh may be, I don't think he can accept truth when it forms part of an official report. But this is what the MRD report said. And they said that today Tata and SR are waiting, along with other corporations, waiting for the tribals who have been displaced from that area, waiting for that land to be given to them for mining. It's not the left or those who believe and subscribe or support or sympathize with the tribals or the resistance, etc., who are saying it. This is an official report which says it. There is something to it, isn't it? So this war is not directed against the Maoist. I'm sorry. The war, in the guise of conducting a war, they are fighting and trying to crush the entire resistance today. Resistance which is trying to stop their lands and forests and other places to be and the waters taken. Please remember, even the MRD report says that 30,000 farmers in Orissa are fighting against Hirakud Dam's decision to give water on a priority basis to POSCO. which will deny 30,000 farmers use of water for irrigation for their own fields. Now, what are you going to do about the livelihood needs of these 30,000 families and people who are dependent on it, the agricultural laborers who are dependent on it? Nobody wants to talk about it. Look at in Chhattisgarh. Let me read out something which is very, I think, very interesting, and just shows you the extent or the limits of peaceful constitutional means. And this is not a make-believe. This is from the records of the State Assembly in Chhattisgarh, where they talked about the privatization of a river called Shionath. Shionath passes through several districts, including Dantewada. 2,000 hectares of land in Dantewada next to Shionath River have been handed over to SR. Now, the interesting thing about this is that in 1998, when the government handed over some rights over water to be given to a private party to enable them to supply it to industry in that area, the peasants naturally resisted because they said that this is going to affect us and our farms. What are we going to do? If you start giving on a priority basis water from Shionath River to the industry, what will happen to us? They protested. From 1998 to 2001, they carried on relentlessly against much opposition. Finally, in 2001, the State Assembly asked the Public Accounts Committee of the Assembly to look into this matter. What did the Public Account Committee say in its report, which came out? This committee was set up in 2003, and they came out with a report. Amongst other things, they characterized this handing over of river water of Shionath River, quote, as criminal offense, previous citation of which can only be found in the criminal world, unquote. Now, one would have expected that after such strictures passed by Public Accounts Committee of the Assembly, the government would resign from its position, withdraw, pull back, and hand over the water and take away the water rights that it had handed over to a private party for a princely sum of rupees 1, by the way. Okay? And they made in the very first year, this company, which had no prior history of working in this area, made about 15 crore rupees net profit. They got it for 1 rupee, they made 15 crores. Everybody went home happy. Brilliant. I really like this. And this, in fact, became a pattern. Rather than the PAC compelling the state to withdraw the privatization of the river, it actually became a precedent for other rivers to be privatized. Now, this is the history. Now, what do you expect people to do? What do you expect farmers to do? Some of them will resign themselves to their fate. Others would think in terms of compensation. But there will be many who will feel, well, if this is what our fate is, and we are reduced, our land is going to go away, we might as well stand up and fight. Now, what are we going to tell them? Please don't fight. Please take recourse to the judiciary. Please go to elect a better person to the assembly. Why don't you approach the district magistrate or the district collector for relief, etc., etc., etc. All this has been done. All this has been done. You think Adivasis have not done it for the last 63 years? I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. And I see Anil. My point is very simply that at moments like this, it's required of us to look more carefully into what the government claims and government claims are, what government's policies are, what government's propaganda says, and go behind it, demystify it, go behind it to understand why this is happening. It will not do to judge Maoists on the basis of the crimes that they have committed. And I say it with very clear, if those amongst us believe that the Indian state is still capable of delivering, despite the innumerable crimes that they have committed, and if we were to list those crimes, it would be staggering. The Maoists would be nowhere close to the crimes that the state has committed against our people in the last 63 years. Yet if we are believed to give them a benefit of doubt, or we still believe that there are still good people, that Sonia madam will save us, or somebody, some other well-meaning person sitting there in authority will bail us out and help this country and help us or end this, then please use that much of your sympathy and your sentiments for the Maoists to also to accept that they are not just fighting for themselves. At this juncture, the war that they are fighting is for an entire resistance. If we do not accept it, and if we do not accept it as an integral part of that resistance, or broad resistance, will not be in a position to come out and take a position which should be and have been an old demand, and the oldest demand, or for which we should be coming out on the streets and protesting, which is no to war against our people. Please outlaw that the government should have no authority to declare war against our people. This government says that war is not an option with Pakistan. I believe in it. Heartily, wholeheartedly, I am with the government on this. I also don't believe in war with Pakistan. But I want this same government to be forced to declare also that war is not an option against our own people. It's only when that happens that we can start looking at things differently. It is at that point the question of violence and political violence will become meaningful and sensible. At this juncture, to ask the Maoists to stop is like asking them to surrender, and certainly I would not like them to do. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Before I call upon Arundhati Roy, may I request you to just move a little ahead, howsoever you can just move ahead to make space for people standing outside. Please. There are lots of people actually standing outside, they could come in. Please make way for them to come in. I invite Arundhati Roy to deliver a speech.
Thank you, Gautam. I must say that Gautam is one of the few intellectuals in this country who has the integrity and the right to speak with the kind of passion that he spoke today, because he's been saying what he's been saying year after year after year. Actually, it's in a way I was being lazy. I said, Gautam, you speak first, because then you'll say everything and I won't have to say much. And that is the case. I'm just going to try and come at this from a different angle. It's so hot here, it looks as though I'm uncomfortable with my politics. I'm not, it's just hot. First of all, I think we should reverse the way we are approaching this and thinking about it, and the way it's being presented to us. You know, the way it's being presented to us is that there is this unrest in the country, which it is the duty of the government to suppress in order to safeguard its good and decent citizens. The fact is that nobody needs this war more than the government. Nobody needs this war more than the government. And it is trying to create a situation, it's trying to fashion an enemy that it can easily demonize in order to justify this war. It's an old trick, you know. I mean, unfortunately, it might be bad for our egos or our sense of ourselves or our sense of history or our sense of uniqueness to think that anything that is happening here in terms of the way the building blocks are being placed is new. These are very, very old games that many other countries and many other people have had decades of experience in. But even if you look at when this government came to power first, the Congress, the UPA came to power first in 2004, and Manmohan Singh said that the Maoists are the greatest internal security threat in the country. What was the situation of the Maoists then? They had just been virtually eliminated, virtually annihilated in Andhra Pradesh. Something like 1,600 of their cadre had been wiped out. So what was it about them that was the greatest internal security threat? Why was it that when he said that, the share prices of the mining companies began to shoot up? Because it was a signal to them that I'm going to do something about this. But, of course, it's not always in their control. You know, as Gautam said, once you start an attack, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They became, I mean, I don't still consider them an internal security threat, but in the terms of how the government thinks about it, certainly by shining the light on them so much, by making them so important, they actually made the Maoists bigger than they ever were. And they need that. I remember, it might have been in 2002 or something. I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a Adivasi Gotra Mahasabha, which is an Adivasi organization in Kerala, which for years had been agitating for land rights and had been promised land. And of course, the promise was only, as all promises are in this country, just to kind of disrupt the build-up of a political movement. And they were not given the land. So about 4,000 Adivasis went and took over the national park in Muthenya, in a place called Muthenya, North Kerala. There was a police firing and they were shot at. And nobody came out in the favor of the Adivasi. The environmentalists said, oh, why should they have taken over a national park? You know, the elephants walk through here. Nobody went there and bothered to notice that that park had been clear-felled and eucalyptus trees had been planted for the Birla rayon plant. Those Adivasis were shot at, and then we were all told, oh, they are Maoists. They were trying to create a parallel state. There was a weapons display. I went there. I went to the hospital. I saw these people who were, I felt like I was towering over them. They were like small and with their heads broken open, their feet blown off. And there was a weapons display of kitchen knives, of axes. One of them had collected a polythene bag full of bees to overthrow the Indian state with. And from then it started. Every time, in Mehendi Khera, wherever you looked at non-violent protest, they were always labeled as Maoist at a time when there was nothing like the kind of Maoist movement there is now. So, why does the government need this war? Why does it need it now, and why does it need it so badly? You see, I think we have to understand that what it's doing is to inflate the meaning of Maoist to a point where it loses any political sense. Anybody who is raising issues of injustice, anybody who's refusing to surrender their land or their resources, whether they are armed, whether they are not, are today called Maoists. An old uncle of mine called me the other day and he said, I've stopped working now. I've lots of time for you and I'd like to help you to do something. So I said, what do you want to help me do? He says, these issues of injustice that you keep raising, I'd like to do something. I said, please don't talk like that on the phone. They'll say you're a Maoist. Honestly, it's become that. It suits the Maoists, sure. Why shouldn't it? I mean, why should any political party refuse that invitation? But coming back to what is it that makes it so urgent for the government to fight this war? In 2004, when Manmohan Singh came to power, by 2005, there were huge numbers of MOUs signed with mining companies, with not just mining, with every kind of infrastructure. So in that entire forest belt, you had an MOU on every mountain, on every river, on every forest. So what they refer to the Maoist corridor, we call the MOUist corridor. And those MOUs were signed by the biggest corporations in the world. And since 2005, they've been waiting. If you read the business papers, you will get a much more honest, because the business papers don't have any sense of irony, So they're very open about what all this is about. So you read the business papers, you'll understand quite clearly which companies are waiting for which patch of land and how the delays are affecting them. So 2005, they arrived, all these corporations, circling around these forest areas like vultures, waiting, sitting in the first-class airport lounge and sipping their drinks and blinking like lazy predators, saying, come on, we've paid you. I mean, where do those thousands of crores of the Reddy brothers and the Madhu Kodas come from? The media is quite happy to highlight the fact that these politicians are corrupt, but never do they try and ask who paid them. Where did that money come from? That money came from the forests, from the rivers, and from the mountains of our country. Just the bauxite in Orissa alone is worth $4 trillion. Just the bauxite. Then you have the iron ore and you have everything else. If you have any idea how these MOUs and how these contracts are working, the government for iron ore gets 24 rupees a ton. The private corporation gets 5,000. Can you believe that? And these are not my figures. Read the Lokayukta report and you will find out. So, for those companies to buy governments, to buy judges, to buy the media, of course, is nothing, to buy universities, to buy intellectuals, not by saying, here, how much do you come for, but, there are very sophisticated ways of buying people. For example, I'll give you a grant. What sort of research would you like to do? The biggest steel corporations in this country, the Jindals, the Mittals, Tata, they fund half the activists in this country. They fund the biggest sort of cutting-edge Indian artists who are having shows in MoMA and all over the place, making large steel buckets or small tiffin carriers or whatever the new thing is. But they fund them. So they buy our silence, and sometimes we don't even know that they've bought our silence. If you look at all the ways in which these NGOs work, if you look at the ways in which organizations like DFID work, the Tatas can fund both sides. They can fund the media, they can fund the activists, they can also make the mines, they can buy the government, they can do anything. I mean, you saw, I don't know how many of you seen those transcripts of how many senior journalists who set themselves up as being very neutral and very radical, actually lobbying for a particular ministry because Tata should benefit from that. Today's scams are not in crores, they're in tens of thousands of crores. This is the kind of money that is going around. So what we have in opposition to this, apart from a few of us, who are yelling from the rooftops, what we have in opposition to this is an insurrection in the heart of this country. The Maoists are the most militant end of that insurrection. But there's a whole bandwidth, there's a whole biodiversity of resistance that has sprung up. All of them don't agree with each other. Sometimes they hate each other. Sometimes they have wars in which they kill each other. But all of them agree about one thing, and that is that this massive sale is just not on. So, whether it's the Narmada Bachao Andolan, or whether it's the movements in Kalinganagar, or whether it's what's going on in POSCO, or Jharkhand, or Lalgarh, or in Chhattisgarh, the fact is, whether it's the Maoists, at the heart of this problem is land. I mean, I have studied and followed closely the Narmada movement for many years. We know that just big dams alone have displaced more than 33 million people. All of the big infrastructural projects, the first thing they do is to displace the poor. The first thing they do. Any dam you go to now, they ask them, of course they'll say that people should be resettled, but have they been? I mean, even today the Narmada Andolan is there. Sardar Sarovar, Maheshwar, the whole scam of rehabilitation. The government openly says we don't have land. We cannot give you land for land. But how did you find 140,000 hectares of land for SEZs so suddenly to give to the corporations? Suddenly, when you want it, you find it. Even if you have to kill people. None of us is here, at least certainly I'm not here to defend the killing of innocent people by anybody. Not by the CPM, not by the Maoists, not by the government. That's not my brief. And I'm also completely contemptuous of this atrocity-based political analysis. It's like some condemnation industry where we all have to buy shares and, show how great we are at shareholdings. When the CRPF were killed, when 76 CRPF people were killed, there was, by the Maoists in Dantewada, there was this incredible pressure. You went in, you wrote about them, you painted them as, you romanticized them, you romanticized violence. Now please come out and kill and condemn the killing of these 76 CRPF. But if you were to ask, what was 76 CRPF doing in a tribal village with 21 AK-47s, 38 Insas rifles, 7 SLRs, 6 light machine guns, 1 Sten gun, and 1 2-inch mortar? What were they doing? Who were they there to kill? If your answer is that they were there because there's a war, and that they were there because the Maoists are armed and there's a conflict, then by forcing you to unanimously condemn that killing, you're forcing somebody to unanimously say, okay, I support you, I'm on the government side of this war. But it's not so simple. It's a very thorny, knotty issue. It's not so simple. It's not possible for me to go to that place, to look at those people who are starving. They only have loincloths and bows and arrows. You want to snatch away that too, and I have to also come down on your side. I'm sorry, I can't. I just simply cannot do it. I feel a bit embarrassed when we talk about we are against a war on our own people. Because, as Gautam says, ever since India became an independent sovereign country, it has behaved like a colonial power. From the moment it won independence, it has been at war. Nagaland, Manipur, Hyderabad, Goa, Assam, Punjab, Kashmir, the Naxalite movement in West Bengal, Telangana. Just look at it. I mean, they blame the Maoists for believing in protracted war. But here is a state that believes in protracted war, that has killed 68,000 people, or that war has killed 68,000 people in Kashmir alone. There's no body count in the Northeast. We have laws like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act that allows non-commissioned officers to kill on sight, and we call ourselves a democracy. And now we have those laws extended, of course, to this area. And there is something quite interesting. If you stare at that list, if you stare very hard at that list of wars that have been prosecuted by the Indian state. War against Nagas, against Manipuris, against who are tribal people, war against the Goans, who are mostly Christians, war against Sikhs, against every kind of minority. Against tribals, against every kind of minority. It's an upper caste Hindu state making war against every kind of other. I mean, I wish I could show you this picture, since we are all talking about bloodthirsty Maoists and their violence. You can't see it, but that's a picture of a chief minister who you all know, whose name begins with N and whose surname begins with M. And he's doing puja to AK-47s and to SLRs. And it says, arms and the man. Gujarat CM worships weapons at his residence in Gandhinagar. Okay. So, none of us worship weapons, at least I don't. But the point is, what is going on in this country? I mean, I'm not somebody who believes that the only people that are resisting this is this pristine and beautiful revolutionary force called the Maoists. I'm not one of those. There is, as I said, a bandwidth of resistance movements, and that is what gives this resistance in our country such a depth and such a beauty. As I said, it's not a new war. I really want to read a poem to you, if you wouldn't mind. Could I? Okay, I will read a poem to you. But I want to say this, that the war that's being waged is not a new war. But if we win, it will be a new victory. And we can win, because I don't think there's an example of any country, anywhere in the history of this kind of fighting, where the poorest people in the world, the poorest, most malnutritioned people in the world, are waging a resistance against the richest corporations in the world, supported by the security forces, by the corporate media, by the judiciary of the biggest democracy or so-called democracy in the world. Okay, and they're winning. They have stopped these corporations in their tracks so far. And if we join them, we can make it stop. I really believe that we can make history if we want to. It can happen, because there is a depth of understanding. There's a depth of understanding. You see, this insurrection that's going on, it's asking some very, very serious questions. Not just about justice and so on. It's asking you it's questioning the meaning of democracy, and it's questioning the meaning of civilization itself. What does that mean, being civilized? What does civilization mean? And it's not that these questions have not been asked before. Of course, they have been. They have been. But they've been asked in universities. They've been asked in seminars. They've been asked in art galleries. But here you have a situation where hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people are putting their bodies on the line to ask this question. And it's a very, very profound question. And it's a question that the answer to that question is the key to what is going to become, not of the Congress government, not of the BJP, not of the Maoists, I really don't care, of this planet, of this civilization, of the human race. I don't even care only about the human race, of all those birds on the Gulf of Mexico with oil slick in their feathers. All of that. These people are fighting a war that is questioning all of that. And that is the beauty of this resistance. I actually think that I'm even bored of asking questions of the state, because I don't expect any answers from the state. I don't. I think it's much more interesting to interrogate the resistance to which we belong. I'm on this side of the line. I'm very clear about that. I don't care. Pick me up, put me in jail. I'm on this side of the line. But on this side of the line, turn around and ask your comrades questions. For our sake, for the sake of the struggle, for the sake of pushing things forward. But years ago, I was at a meeting of iron ore workers in Rajnandgaon in Chhattisgarh many years ago, when Manmohan Singh, who had been the finance minister, had done all the reforms and then lost elections to the BJP. So he was in the opposition. He was nobody. So a Hindi poet at that meeting read a poem called Manmohan Singh Kya Kar Raha Hai Aajkal. And the first two lines were Manmohan Singh Kya Kar Raha Hai Aajkal, Wish Kya Karta Hai Khoon Mein Utarne Ke Baad. Like you've done it. You've dismantled everything. You've opened the markets. You've done all that. Now you don't have to do anything more, no? You can just travel through the bloodstream. You can just destroy our lives. You can just destroy our villages. You can just destroy our jobs by sitting there. And that's what actually happened in 1989 when capitalism won its jihad against communism in the bleak mountains of Afghanistan. The whole world did a somersault, including our country, which was non-aligned, which had some kind of pride, suddenly became a natural ally of Israel and the US. And while I'm here at this public forum, I do want to say it is an outrage what Israel did yesterday to that flotilla, and we all should condemn it. But when they did this somersault in 1989, this government opened two locks. It opened the lock of the Indian markets, and it opened the lock of the Babri Masjid. And those two locks set into the world into our world, two kinds of totalitarianism: Hindu fundamentalism and market fundamentalism. And for both of them, the government needed to generate its own kinds of terrorism. So we had Islamic terrorism and the Red Terror. And so the situation is, you can say as much as you like, go for elections. Whoever you vote for has cloved feet. Whoever you vote for, the opposition will always be on the right. Whoever you vote for, it's like one corporation, one holding company with two brands of washing powder, sunlight or moonlight, I don't know, whatever. So we're stuck in that now. And what this insurrection is doing is to try and blow a hole in that cap that is depleting the oxygen from our brains, which is making us into zombies, which is making us ridiculous. You know, when I came back from the forest, when I wrote Walking with the Comrades, I was very happy when I was accused of romanticism. You know why? Because I believe in romance. I believe in the romance of revolution. I believe in the romance of that beautiful forest. I believe that there's something so wonderful about those people standing up and telling you, you know what, that's enough. That's enough. We love romanticism, right? When it's Slumdog Millionaire, when you're romanticizing people who are so screwed that all they have is to fall through shitholes and run around with gangs, and oh wow, that's lovely. You can romanticize poverty. Every Bollywood film can romanticize violence. All our stupid Bollywood stars can go there and flex their stupid biceps, and you think, wow, what a lovely body, you know, who did it? How did you do it? But when that romance, when that violence becomes political, when that violence is prosecuted by some starving man who says, I want more, then, oh my God, it's such a frightening thought for the middle class. As long as it's some airhead with biceps and a machine gun, you're fine, right? He's not going to do anything to you. But, so this is a poem by Pablo Neruda, and I think he must have written it for Manmohan Singh and Chidambaram. It's called Standard Oil Company. When the drill bored down toward the stony fissures and plunged its implacable intestine into the subterranean estates and dead years, eyes of the ages, imprisoned plant roots and scaly systems became strata of water. Fire shot up through the tubes, transformed into cold liquid in the customs house of the heights. Issuing from its world of sinister depth, it encountered a pale engineer and a title deed. However entangled the petroleum's arteries may be, however the layers may change their silent sight and move their sovereignty amid the earth's bowels, when the fountain gushes its paraffin foliage, Standard Oil arrived beforehand with its checks and its guns, with its governments and its prisoners. Their obese emperors from New York are suave, smiling assassins who buy silk, nylon, cigars, petty tyrants and dictators. They buy countries, people, seas, police, county councils, distant regions where the poor hoard their corn like misers their gold. Standard Oil awakens them, clothes them in uniforms, designates which brother is the enemy. The Paraguayan fights its war, and the Bolivian wastes away in the jungle with its machine gun. That's the Salvajurum and its brother. A president assassinated for a drop of petroleum, a 1 million-acre mortgage, a swift execution on a morning. Even the pages are soaked. On a morning mortal with light, petrified, a new prison camp for subversives in Patagonia, a betrayal, scattered shots beneath a petroliferous moon, a subtle change of ministers in the capital, a whisper like an oil tide, and zap, you'll see how Standard Oil's letters shine above the clouds, above the seas in your home, illuminating their dominions. So, this war is an old one, but if we win it, we'll make history. I just want to end this. I think, since Gautam has given us such a nice picture of exactly what's going on. Briefly, I just want to say that in Dandakaranya, where I walked with the comrades, where Gautam walked with the comrades, 644 villages have been emptied. More than 300,000 people are missing from the government's radar. Many of them live in Andhra Pradesh. Many of them are just living in the forest, totally terrified of coming back to their villages. I was reading a book about the Telangana movement in 46, in 52. Same thing. The same kind of violence, the same kind of rape, the same kind of terror, the same alignment of forces. Now, the question is, I don't believe in an atrocity-based analysis of this. I don't believe I should be asked, do you support the killing of innocent people? Only the Israelis ask those questions, you know? So, of course, all the weapons that will be used to fight the poor will come from Israel. But that's separate. In the 20 jungle warfare training schools that are coming up, because, you see, this economic totalitarianism, this kind of economic policy can only be implemented if we turn into an armed state. So we should be really ashamed of the fact that Pakistan, which is a country that has never been allowed to have a democracy, not because they are worse people and we are better people, but because the Americans interfered in their politics all the time, never allowed it to be a democracy. But those people who have only endured a military state are fighting for a democracy. And we, who only ever had a democracy, are fighting for a military state. Our middle class, our media are begging for a military state. We should be ashamed. But then 90% of their profits come from corporates, from advertising. So what else would they be asking for? Because Mr. Chidambaram and Mr. Manmohan Singh believe in a vision. They say so openly, again and again. Our vision is that 85% of India should live in cities. That means 500 million people should be moved from villages to cities. That's the kind of social engineering they're thinking of. It cannot be done unless we become a military state. And once those people move into the cities, they will be moved into the slums. Look what's happening in Delhi. People are moving there, and then the Commonwealth Games have to come, right? So people have to move out. The Indian government, the bid for the Commonwealth Games, 2,800 crores. The actual amount spent, 30,000 crores. Who's asking questions and where's that money going? You know what? Into stadiums for warming up. That's the kind of thing we need really badly in this country, stadiums for warming up. But I think there is a question I would like to ask the Maoists, and it is this: that I think a lot of the confusion comes from people who either want to say the Maoists and the state are killing the tribals. There's a sort of sandwich theory. The poor tribals are getting caught in the crossfire. There is another view which says the Maoists represent the tribals. Neither of these things is true, because it's true that 99% of the Maoists are tribals, but not the other way around. 99% of the tribals are not Maoists. When I say that there is an insurrection in this country, people ask me, do you believe in violence? Do you believe in violence? It's such a brain-dead question, because in human nature, there's always been violence and love. And when we decide to love and when we decide to be violent is something that every human being decides for themselves. But today, what has happened is that because of the virtual, of course the Maoists quite openly have an annihilation theory, but the Indian state did try to annihilate Maoists. And when it did that, the Maoists retreated into the forests, where for the last 30 years they have been working among the people and have a pretty formidable entrenched resistance in states like Dantewada. I mean, in places like Dantewada, places like Dandakaranya, very, very organized. But here you have a movement which says that its stated aim is to overthrow the Indian state with armed violence. But its armies are people who've never been outside the forest, who don't know what the Indian state is. Deliciously. I think it's fantastic not to know what India is, because I frankly don't know what India is either. But it doesn't know what that geographical outline, which actually the British made for us, is. So who do we mean when we say Maoists? The SP of Dantewada told me, see ma'am, my boys have killed these 18 Maoists. And he showed me these pictures. I said, well, I can see that you killed 18 people, but how am I supposed to know that they're Maoists? Mathe pe to nahi likha hai ki main Maoist hu. So he said, ma'am, see, they have malaria medicines and Dettol bottles and all these things from outside. So this is why they are Maoists. They probably had polythene bags full of bees as well. This is not to say that, that's all the weapons they have. They have AK-47s, they have machine, all their heavy weapons are being taken by the police. But what do we mean when we say Maoists? Are each of these people who know exactly what the Maoist vision for a state is? And what is that vision? In one of the questions that I keep asking is, can we leave the bauxite in the mountain? And that question is asked not just to the government, but also to the resistance. Because today, people like me are totally on the side of the resistance, because I feel that it is asking that very radical question. But in fact, they don't have a mining policy. And if you see what things are being said about mining, they are no different from what the Indian state says, except they don't believe in privatization, but they believe in state capitalism. And I think that this is a very, very serious issue that needs to be interrogated seriously, because the Adivasi Dong, the Dongriya Kond who are fighting in Niyamgiri are not fighting for state capitalism. They are fighting to leave the bauxite in the mountain. They are saying, we don't want bombs, we don't want planes, we don't want the things that you use aluminium for. We just want a mountain. So, if you can't say things like, we'll do ecologically friendly mining, because you don't understand what mining means then. You don't understand what bauxite mining means. Bauxite is used to produce alumina, which is then refined to produce aluminium. It uses tremendous amounts of water, tremendous amounts of electricity. You have to have big dams. You have to have big dams if you're going to mine bauxite, if you're going to produce that. You have to understand that if you're going to produce it and sell it to China, then China's going to make weapons and use it against you. So I feel that really in this bandwidth of resistance movements, there needs to be some serious conversation, because perhaps those Gandhian movements like the Narmada Bachao Andolan do have a revolutionary vision. They do not have a revolutionary strategy of resistance. The Maoists have a revolutionary strategy of resistance, but they don't have a revolutionary vision. I do not believe that the communist parties have a vision that is different from the vision of the world there is today, and there is proof in China to tell us that eventually all the trains stop at a kind of capitalism. What China is doing in other countries in the world is unforgivable, So unless we have that vision, I think we're in a lot of trouble. And I want to say that while the state and many, many people, including myself, believe that the Maoist party does have a totalitarian vision, It does have a vision that does not tolerate dissent. It has not tolerated dissent on the ground. It needs to, and because it believes in that military strategy, needs to control the places it controls. And I cannot quarrel with that military strategy right now, because obviously when there's such a push against it, every other movement is slowly having to give way. And here is a movement that is refusing to give way. But then we have to think, what's going to happen with that? What kind of vision is that bringing? Not later, I'm not talking about when it comes to power, but even now. Right now, here is something admirable that has happened, where you have a rock-hard resistance, elastic because of all these different disagreements and beliefs and arguments. I think that makes it stronger. When you try to fuse into one, you become weaker. I think, in a way, all this dissent and argument makes it stronger. But we need to understand that we can't betray the causes that we are fighting for, eventually. And the real fight here is that the most totalitarian of all systems is the capitalist system. The reason that these tribal areas are under attack and that they are able to resist in the way they are resisting is because they are outside the capitalist system. It's because they don't have cell phones and credit cards and commonplace dreams. It's because they don't have unique ID cards. It's because they cannot be controlled in the ways that we can be controlled. So if you look at it, all across South Asia, what are the places under attack? From Afghanistan to Waziristan to the Northeast frontier to this entire so-called Red Corridor. Another way of looking at it, all of them are under assault by a marauding capitalist financial system. All under attack for the same reason. The resistance takes different shapes and forms. In Afghanistan, it's taking the form of radical Islam. In some places, it's taking the form of wars for self-determination. Here, it's taking the form in some areas of radical communism, somewhere Gandhianism, somewhere Gandhian socialism, whatever it is. But the assault is an assault of a capitalist state. So I just want to read out a last passage to you before I stop and we can take questions. But across the Asian subcontinent, from Afghanistan through Waziristan, the northwest frontier provinces of Pakistan, through the northeastern states of India, and across the Red Corridor, it is the tribal areas that have risen up in revolt. The nature of the uprising has taken the form of radical Islam in Afghanistan and Pakistan and shaded into radical communism in the forested heartland of India. But the assault on these tribal homelands is driven by the free market and capitalism's endless quest to capture and control what it sees as natural resources. It would be too much to expect that an alternative to what looks like the prospect of protracted war will come from the imagination that brought the planet to this crisis in the first place. So I think that's very important for us to understand that the imagination that created this destruction all over the world is not going to be the imagination that gives us the solution. Wars like Operation Green Hunt aim to exterminate those who know the secrets of genuinely sustainable ways of living. Victory for the prosecutors of this war will contain within it the seeds of apocalyptic destruction, not just for the Adivasi people, but eventually for the human race. So the first step towards imagining a world gone terribly wrong would be to stop annihilating those who have a different imagination, an imagination outside of capitalism and, for that matter, of communism, an imagination which has an altogether different understanding of what constitutes happiness and fulfillment. To gain this philosophical space, it is necessary to concede some physical space for the survival of those who may look to us like the keepers of our past, but who may really be the guides to our future. To do this, we have to ask, can we leave the water in the rivers, the trees in the forest? Can we leave the bauxite in the mountain? And if we cannot, perhaps we should stop preaching morality to the victims of this war. So what I'm saying is not that, oh, we should stop everything and all of us should become tribals. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying if in this race for destruction that we call development, we can stop and say, all right, everything is not fuel to be put into this end game. And if we can find the imagination to leave that forest as it is, and this I'm saying to the Maoists, to the Gandhians, and to everyone, to the tribals too. If we can find a way of saying, okay, we have to stop, we have to leave this like this, and we have to start thinking about waste, thinking about recycling, thinking about different forms of energy, thinking about different kinds of war. Only then once we leave that, it'll have a sort of domino effect. It'll force us to start thinking of other things in the way that when the taps are turned off, you immediately start thinking of conserving water. It'll force our imaginations to open. And that's why we need to think about this extremely seriously, all of us, because it's not true that your lives won't be affected. It's not true. Your lives will be affected by this war. It will be affected because you cannot hold down millions of people. You have 700,000 troops in Kashmir. Sure, the government keeps talking about bringing out this army, but where has it started a war that is actually stopped? Where? You have 700,000 troops in Kashmir, you have troops all over the northeast. Are we going to have troops all over here? It's not possible. It's not possible to control this. I mean, they can call out the army if they like. They can call out the Air Force. I don't know why they're talking to the Navy. It sounds a bit ridiculous. But anyway, whatever, they can do all that. But they're not going to win it. They're not going to win it. I can tell you that. They can do it, but they won't win. Because it's not possible to win a war like this. It's not possible. Thank you.
We can have some questions. I think we don't have mic here. Go around. You can speak loud. Probably we can manage that.
Hello. I share every emotion expressed and raised among all of us today. My only question is, until human nature changes, power corrupts, and we are all greedy. Everyone in power is greedy. What can we do, is my question. What can I do?
Well, I don't think we should so easily concede that human nature only wants power and is only greedy, you know. I think that it is also sensible, and here the appeal is not for us to be moral or evangelical or missionary. The appeal is to look after your own self-interest and understand, look after it in a serious way, not in a stupid way, you know, because one of the really sad things about human beings is that, not human beings actually, about this modern society that we've built for ourselves, is that we're neither like animals who live in the present and think about the present, nor are we prophets who can see into the future. We're sort of strange, in-between creatures who have some very sort of every 5 years we re-elect our imaginations, So we've got to understand this. I don't think it's that difficult to understand what's going on here. It's as simple to understand as you don't want someone to walk into your house. If someone walks into your house and starts stealing your stuff, you're not going to stand and say, we have to change human nature. You're going to say, what can you do? You can. I don't know what your skills are, but if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, that's true. But we are all doing what we can do. No, I'm a writer, so I write. He does what he does. There are people in the forest doing what they do. I'm sure you can find a way, even if it's just talking to young people, understanding it, even if it's worth. Well. Okay, then you can go and teach some kids in the forest.
What is development? For whom this development is? Why do we want this development? What is this money? And why should we work for? What is this work? Why should we work for 40 years of our life? Why are we fooling ourselves? What are these positions, comforts, luxuries, pleasures? What do we get with all this? Why do we want all this?
You're sounding like a Gond Adivasi from Dandakaranya. Absolutely. I mean, these are the questions we should ask ourselves. I sometimes wonder when the Marxist Party says that, the Adivasis are not a revolutionary force, only workers are a revolutionary force. So in order to make everyone, first you have to enslave everyone, make them a wage earner. Then you have to say that you're a revolutionary force and you must overthrow the system. I don't understand it, but I think that these are very, very important questions to ask ourselves. Because what has happened is that our brains have been short-circuited to accept what the TV tells you happiness is. If your child can have Maggi noodles and Horlicks and this stuff or whatever, So that's what I'm saying. It's not. We have to re-understand the meaning of fulfillment and of happiness. Then we can dismantle the system.
Ms. Roy, I just wanted to. Right. Yeah, my question is for Ms. Roy. Just as an author, I wanted to ask you. You were talking about how the.
Someone hates you.
Hope that wasn't me. All right, but basically what I wanted to ask you is that you were talking about how the media portrays something that is not there, and the government has a role to play in that, being censorship or stopping news. Now, there is a book that is being written by an author called Xavier Moro. I may be pronouncing his name a little bit different, but Xavier Moro. He's writing a novel called The Red Sari. And it's partly written on Mrs. Sonia Gandhi as well. There are some inspiration that are taken on that. So the Congress government also trying to censor that book. So as an author, how do you feel about that? What is your reaction to that?
See, I mean, I don't even have to say, I'm sure, that I don't believe in censorship of any kind. I mean, let's take that as a given. The more interesting question is, why is it that liberals who so fiercely pursue the goal of free speech, that's dangerous. A country like America, which has such very sophisticated legislation on the freedom of speech, has auctioned the platforms where speech can be made to the highest bidders. So free speech is too expensive for the poor now. It's a nice idea, but it's too expensive for the poor. And I think that there's nothing liberals in the world like more than some campaign to stop censorship of some book or something or the other. And those are very good and worthy campaigns. I'm all for them. But right now we're talking about the silencing of a virtual genocide, of a virtual annihilation of a whole civilization. And that's what I'm concerned about right now.
Hello.
What do you mean when you say Maoist? I never said that. If you read the new Outlook, you'll find a letter from me. Basically, I have never said that the Maoists are Gandhians with guns. That was an Outlook blurb. What I said was that if you walk with this Maoist army, you'll see that their consumption patterns are more Gandhian than any Gandhian, that their carbon footprint is lighter than any climate change evangelist. Then ironically, I said even their sabotage techniques are Gandhian. And should I write a play, Gandhi Get Your Gun, or will I be lynched? At which point the ones with a slightly slower mind concluded that I said they were Gandhians with guns. What I was pointing to was the irony of a Maoist army with Gandhian consumption patterns and very un-Gandhian attitudes to resistance, who believe in armed struggle. And in this letter I've said perhaps the confusion is purposely ignited because the Indian elite and middle class would like the opposite. They would like conspicuous consumption for the middle class and non-violent resistance for the poor.
Another thing, you talked about the media getting bought out and some of them being with the slow mind, as we have seen in interviews. I think everybody agrees with that, and which is why a lot of us are here today. My question is this, that we tend to often hear these things in fora where everybody agrees, and it's probably because a lot of us are frustrated because there is no avenue or outlet where we can hear sort of the other voice. But if there's this constant alienation of the mainstream of the fringe, which is what all news channels where we watch your interviews and you struggle to comment and talk on those shows because they keep repeatedly asking you, do you agree with the violence? If then that space sort of gets diminished, is there a risk that we are painting ourselves into a corner where we only our friends are in that corner where we all agree, and the people who really need to listen get uncomfortable? I'm referring to an article that Veer Sanghvi wrote about you. I think he meant to be kind, because he wrote that, we should have space for dissent. And even in the time of Vietnam War, the great thing about America was the American civilians were coming out and they defended their country's democracy and all of that. It was very disturbing to read because it basically meant that now we have a label for you to put out in a corner so that now I can deal with it, because what was an uncomfortable truth for me is now, okay, dissent, good for the larger democracy, so I should hear you but not necessarily listen to you. How do you deal with that?
Okay, there are a few things here which I think are very interesting. Let me pick up on the phrase, have we painted ourselves into a corner? If your universe sort of consists of Lutyens, Delhi and Kolaba or something, surely, which I think people like Veer Sanghvi's universe does, then you can think that you're a majority because you control these big mainstream media voices. But in fact, we are the majority. It's just that very few people in that majority are allowed to speak on this corporate boardroom bulletin. And that is why there is this struggle, because people have lost faith. Do you think the Maoists care? They are fighting there. You want to fight? Do you think the people of Kalinganagar are fighting? They're not looking for what NDTV's viewers are saying, whether they're right or wrong. So it is the elite of this country that has painted themselves into a corner and then put a hood over their heads in which they think that they are the universe. I think that the most successful secessionist movement in this country has been the secession of the middle and upper classes into outer space, where they look down from there and they say, what's our bauxite doing in their mountains? What's our water doing in their rivers? They have their own social justice movements, justice for Jessica and all of that. They don't care about what happens to everyone else. But the fact is, we are the majority. We are the major majority. There's no little corner. It's a whole, step out. Step out and go anywhere, go to any village in Orissa and see what's going on. The greatest thing about Operation Green Hunt, let me tell you, it has done what none of us writers and filmmakers and all of us have been able to do in many years. It has clarified the position for ordinary people completely. It has made the corporate boardroom graphics step out of those plush boardrooms in full combat gear, ready to kill. So every child in Dandakaranya, in Kalinganagar, in Potko, in Jagat Singhpur, in Lalgarh knows today that those paramilitary forces are the minions of the Tatas, of POSCO, of ArcelorMittal, not of a government. Because we don't have a government. We only have a corporate state now. That's all we have. And there is a battle. And this middle class opinion, it's loud, but it's not the majority, let me tell you. And as long as it keeps on deluding itself that it is the majority, this battle will deepen and deepen and deepen. And it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me whether I'm in the minority, I'm one, I'm two, I'm marginalized, I'm here, I'm there. I'm on this side. And this is where I want to be. You want to be here, be here. You don't want to be here, don't be here. I'm not a politician, I'm not polling for popularity here. I know which side I'm on. And there I am, whatever Veer Sangvi or whoever the hell thinks,
I have this question for both the speakers. Some of us who are engaged in studies on Indian economic issues, we are convinced that Indian society is a very oppressive society. There is no doubt about it. And the governance issues are contributing to this oppression and inequality on a very large scale. In fact, India is one of the most unequal society today. There is no doubt about it. And the governance issues are also coming to the surface very, very sharply. And therefore, there is no question on our part to support this government. There is no question. We can't be on the part of the government. But I pose this question before you. But to move from that, to say that I support now Maoist is a very sharp jump for me. I say this because, according to me, the Marxist parties in this country have neglected agricultural laborers, unorganized labor, and their massive number. 250 million small farmers and agricultural laborers. There is no support base today. There are about 400 million unorganized labor. There is no support base today. 80% of the total industrial labor today. There is no support base today. There is nothing of that sort. And the kind of subjugation that is taking place. You have only see to believe. Some of us, I am sure Mr. Sebastian will come to Kandivali and see in front of the industrial estates and see the kind of suffering that is writ large when they come out of their industrial estates. But there is a vast area which is not there. And to me it appears that the Maoists who are concentrating and hiding in forest and keeping the tribals as a shield are making the state divert its attention from the larger question of crisis in this country. There is a bigger structural crisis, and what is happening is that because the Maoists have neglected this, they could have as well come to the forefront and organized industrial labor, agricultural laborers, and what have you. Why are they not doing it? Because they do not have the political, intellectual power to do that. They have only one goal. Unfortunately, it is a fact of life that we are thinking in terms of changing the state with the barrel of the gun. They will not succeed with such a narrow political basis. They will not succeed. In that sense, the Indian state is much more powerful. I wish these people had a larger political base and larger movement. I saw in Gautam's article, he has raised this issue in the last paragraph. Yes, that these issues have got to be debated. And therefore, for me to say that I support Maoist, I am saying there is a larger question. Revolution is necessary in this country, but the world has not given us good examples of revolutions which are successful. Mao promised land for the poor peasants, but then he has introduced communal nationalization of the land ownership and then destroyed it. Today, he has created one of the most unequal Southeast Asian countries in China. There are problems of that nature which are coming up, and in our case, it is still worse. Therefore, I am asking this question. This support from one to the other, according to me, is a serious question, and they are diverting attention from one to the other. Thank you.
It's very difficult to disagree with you, Dr. Shetty, but I'll try and do it. I don't agree with you. When I said I support the Maoists, I'm making it clear that I support them in this war that has been foisted on them. Does it mean that I agree with everything they do or they have not done or ought to do? No, that's not what I mean. That's not what I also stand for. But that's a separate issue. No, I'm sorry. Just a minute, sir. No, Dr. Shetty, listen to me. No, but Dr. Shetty, please listen to me. Please listen to me. The topic of today is just, topic for today was the war against our people. It's in that context I was speaking. Now, I agree with you that it's high time, or they ought to have been working amongst industrial labor, agricultural workers, etc., etc. But let's look at the reality also. It's fine for us to demand, but is it possible for them? Since 1978, under one pretext or under one law or the other, Maoist or People's War or MCC and all have been banned, proscribed in this country. And you know what proscription means? Proscription means that you cannot organize, you cannot mobilize, you cannot come out with your literature, you cannot hold public meetings in your name. It creates, where is it possible for them, even if they want to? They're not in a position to do it, I believe, because it's not possible for them to come out openly and work. I mean, they'll be picked up, killed, or put behind bars with 30, 40, 50 cases. Well, they'll never come out from jail in this life. The point I'm trying to make is that yes, it is correct to demand from all the parties, and especially the Maoists, who I believe provide the most formidable resistance today that is being offered. And that is one of the reasons why they are also being made a target of. Yes, we have to demand from them, as Arundhati says, we have to ask them those questions. I have a whole set of questions also which are raised with them, and I would like to raise with them again and again. That's not the point. We have to do it and we'll continue to do it. That's not the point. The point is it possible today, even if the Maoists agree, will they be in a position to come out and work? I mean, it's not possible. If the government comes out and says that any person who speaks in support of the Maoists can be hauled up, the Ministry of Home Affairs then issued a directive which has been put up. I mean, it has been distributed everywhere. And they say under Section 39, even a supporter, I mean, they would be regarded as supporters. How is it possible then for somebody who's an active member to come out and work openly? I can tell you in Delhi, I know many colleagues, many people that I work with who also, in one way or another, are connected with this movement, how difficult it is for them to work and how they get picked up. In Delhi, in the last just 4 weeks, about 11 people have been picked up. What were they doing? They lived in the working class slums. They were working amongst, and they ran small trade unions. They didn't have guns or anything. I mean, the party which they belong to or they sympathize with may believe in one thing, but the work they were engaged in, at no way were they carrying out armed resistance or something. They were working, living in the bastis, working to mobilize and organize in the best way possible, given all the hurdles that have been put up. So it's all right to ask, but we have also to look at the other side, whether it is possible for them to do it. But this does not mean that these questions that you raise should not be raised. Yes, I don't believe, the Maoists themselves are pretty clear that they don't expect, even if they were to continue to grow, that they do not expect to come to seize power for the next 50 years. So it's obviously they are aware of their limitations, but it's in a particular context that today's meeting is taking place, and my support for them is also in that context. I don't know whether it satisfies you, Dr. Shetty. I hope there'll be occasions.
We will have a more detailed discussion.
Yes.
I think that, I just think that in answer to that question, I also want to say that sometimes we are already beginning to treat the Maoists as if they are already the state. You know, they're suffering from a kind of celebrity status where it's like Medha Patkar has spent her life fighting against the Sardar Sarovar Dam, and aggressively people will ask her, but madam, what have you done about the dams in the northeast? Arey, why don't you do something? I mean, someone else can do something, right? For the workers, for other people. It's not only the Maoist job to look after everything. And I want to just talk about the choice of resistance and a landscape. You know, it's true that because of the sort of annihilation policy of the Indian state towards the Maoists, they have been forced back into the forests. It's a matter of strange coincidence that fortress into which they retreated suddenly turned out to contain cellars full of gold. So now the government and the corporates want that gold, and they've come across an entrenched resistance. However, let's look at it the other way around. You know, that you have forest villages deep in the forest, takes 3, 4, 5 days to walk to get there. That village is surrounded by sometimes 1,000 CRPF. People have been organized to resist them in very non-Gandhian ways, because just as this Maoist military strategy does not work outside the forest, the Narmada Bachao Andolan could not have been a Maoist movement because it didn't have cover. And also no army was coming into the villages to take over his land. The water was coming into people's villages. You can't shoot at the water, right? You can't blow it up. So it could not have been an armed movement. Similarly, inside Dandakaranya, you could not have had a movement where there was no audience. You know, Gandhian nonviolent resistance requires a kind of an audience in front of which you perform. I don't mean that badly, I mean it very well. But you didn't have that. So there are people who make choices depending on the physical landscape where their struggles are from, it depends on the history. I travel in Orissa and listen to these debates. People, it's not like some non-tribal Maoist Andhra ideologue goes to a village and waves a gun and everyone stands up and joins him. No. People have long debates about what kind of struggles they will wage. They are very wise about the decision. And as the pressure on them builds, they keep making different decisions.
Is it your view, I'm asking both of you, is it your view that for this society, the only method of bringing about social and economic change is armed insurrection? Is it your view that is that the only method left now? Or is there second best method of bringing about social and economic changes? After all, for 100 years of history, you have, as Gautam has pointed out in the article, there have been changes. Social movements have brought about that. Are we not to bring that about instead of preferring?
I don't understand why you are asking this question in such an aggressive way, because I don't think I remotely subscribe to the view that the only way of bringing about change is through armed resistance. I don't subscribe to that at all. However, I do believe that if you are a doctrinaire, non-violent thinker, there is a lot of violence in that too. I believe that. You know, I believe that the strength is in a biodiversity of resistance, in which you actually think through these things without being dogmatic. You know, I really believe that. And because if you actually say, no, this is the only way, or no, this is the only way, you lose both ways. Even if you say the only way is non-violent, you're lost. You're completely a supporter of the middle class cause then. You know? So I think you have to think on your feet like a boxer in the ring. You have to land on your feet. You have to think fast, and you have to think always But I don't believe that the only way is through armed struggle at all. Actually, I don't even think the Maoists believe that.
I think I agree with what Arundhati said, but I'd like to add one thing. I don't believe in the right of the state to monopolize means of violence. I am deeply skeptical. No, it's from this. My support for right of people to be armed is because I reject this notion of the state should or ought to have a monopoly over means of violence. It's only when the state, that's why I say, it has to be no to war against our people. When that is achieved, then and then only will I believe in the possibility of people being able to fight to transform the state and society peacefully. Otherwise, I believe that a combination of the two is very, very necessary, because the state and the ruling classes are not going to give in. And to cite an example from a neighboring country, where the Maoists, having come so close to seizure of power, they stuck a compromise and they forced all the 12 political parties to agree to an elected constituent assembly to set up a new constitution. And the kind of problems that they have encountered should also be something that we should take into account when we come out with a categoric rejection of the usefulness or the need to also be armed.
I mean, how many people stood up and preached non-violence to the Indian state about Kashmir?
So far as the Maoists are concerned, since mid-70s, Maoists have not been able to capture power anywhere in the world. The last time they did in Kampuchea, Pol Pot. In Nepal, the Maoists gave up insurgency not because they were converted to non-violence, precisely because their 10-year insurgency came to a stalemate. Now what is happening, that's of course before us, but it will have to be judged against the experience. Since 1917 November, no armed revolution has succeeded anywhere in the world, and since mid-1970s, nowhere in the world Maoists has captured power, and the last time that they captured power, it was under Pol Pot in Kampuchea.
I would request CPDR to organize a meeting where I can speak. I would love to speak and take up whatever you had to say and counter it. I would really love to, but it will take me at least half an hour to answer completely, because I reject what you have said. I think Nepal's experience cannot be belittled in the way in which you are talking about. The Maoists, the role of the Naxalbari movement, I think it's high time we go back to it. So I will request CPDR to organize a meeting where we can take up these issues. Anand had something.
Basically, I completely share your desire for the bauxite to remain in the mountain and your apprehension that the Maoists will not necessarily guarantee that. I don't think that question has been raised within the party or been discussed. I don't know what their current understanding of it is. What worries me is that I don't believe that a few thousand people armed in the Red Corridor can bring the revolution in India. Especially if it is not able to attract a huge support base. And that huge support base, I think, is very, very threatened every time. I mean, I know you didn't want to talk about politics of atrocities, but every time something like the train incident 2 days ago happens, I think they lose the support base. I think that support base is terribly threatened by every such act. And I don't necessarily believe that the Maoists did not do it. It's possible they did not do it, but in fact, one particular group has actually said that we meant to attack the goods train. But so what happened was an accident, but we did attack the goods train. Every time you take a decision to do something like that, which can which has what the Americans call collateral damage. And if the Maoists also tolerate collateral damage, I think that it hurts their cause terribly.
Okay, I think that here, even when I quite agree with you that they might have blown up, they might have caused that train accident, we don't know who did it, but whoever did it, the question is more about when there is an attack on civilians and they lose a mass base. First of all, I agree that if the Maoists were to make it a point to attack civilians, they will completely lose their base. But I don't think that any guerrilla force, I think that's the thing that's up front in their minds, because they cannot survive for even a day without the support, active support of civilians. They can't. It's not a question of pointing a gun to people's heads and saying, give us food. It doesn't work like that. They have to be accepted. Otherwise it won't. And the minute they stop being accepted, they will no longer be, of course there'll still be Maoists, but they won't have the kind of support that will call a hall full of people in to debate the issue. They'll become redundant. But having said that, let me say this, that if you actually, what surprised me, when I was in the forest and talking to people was that what we so easily accept as morality is not the same there. Because people have been fighting for so many years, and what violence means in that society is totally different from what it means to us. They have lived day and night with violence. So, we all talk about it as if they've suddenly taken up arms, but they've always had arms. They've always carried arms. They have, even now, the militias, they don't have anything new. They still have, point is, whether you have a bow and arrow, or you have an axe, or you have a hathoda, they are prepared to use it. That is the really frightening thing. And these atrocities don't always pan out the way the middle class imagines. Sometimes they're supported. Sometimes they're not. You never know what the real story behind it is. So that's why I'm saying you have to be careful of a atrocity-based analysis, because you never know what the real story is behind it, And, all of us are talking as though they don't have mass support. There's actually in 2004, when they were unbanned briefly, there was such a massive upsurge of support, which is why they were quickly banned again, So these are there are many assumptions that even I went in with, about the role of women in an armed struggle and how they would be marginalized and victimized, which I didn't find, I found the opposite. But coming back to the radical question of can you leave the bauxite in the mountain, I think one of the things we all must understand about what's going on now. Today's papers you saw that they want to call out the army. The pressure is on to build up the army. So what we call and the army chief and the air force chiefs are a bit reluctant. So people call it the democratization of the armed forces and the militarization of the media, where, of course, the democracy in the armed forces, when they say we can't fight our own people, naturally vindicates the argument of the Kashmiris and the people in the Northeast that also, we are not your own people, then why don't you just let us go, But I think one thing we should be very aware of in what's going on. There is a division of labor going on in the Congress party. It's an old Congress party trick. So Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi are the good guys. Chidambaram and Manmohan Singh are the bad guys, right? And underneath it all, there's a deep consensus. There may be actual dislike between Digvijay Singh and Chidambaram, but there's no disagreement. And what is happening now is, on the one hand, you have Operation Green Hunt, and on the other hand, you have Operation Civil Society. And if you can't wipe them out, then buy them out. And that's why I brought up this question of the mining. Because tomorrow, let's say tomorrow, the government were to say, okay, you administer Dandakaranya. The corporates will be there with their $4 trillion signs in their eyes. what's going to happen? You know, already there, I know the whispers. The whispers are happening because so far the charge was, oh, the Maoists are taking money from the corporates in order to run their revolution. Now they've even stopped doing that. They're playing for higher stakes. That's what the corporates feel, no? How can we, like, what's your figure? Tell us what's your figure. Because anything is all right. Just give us those rivers. Just give us those mountains. Anything is all right. We pay anything. Because the sums of money, as Neruda told you, are so huge. So here is the crux. Wipe them out or buy them out. Operation Green Hunt versus Operation Civil Society. So Rahul Gandhi goes to Dantewada. There are big posters of him all over. But he doesn't say a word about the Salva Judum, which is run by the Congress party. The Salva Judum and the BJP government sit together in complete consensus with their clothed feet intertwined, facing off against the poorest people in this country. So please, let's not talk about elections. You know, please. So really the issue is, how do we in the resistance manage to, because what Dr. Shetty said is absolutely right. Today the Maoists are being offered a pair of boots their feet are too small for, their imaginations are too small for. They're too small for their boots right now. The imagination needs to expand. It needs to be able to make alliances with the resistance. You know, because that vision alone is not going to bring about a revolution. Neither is the mainstream left vision, which has been pushed back to a point where no one, forget revolution, nobody even thinks of them as a resistance. They only think of them as an oppressor now, you know. So I'm not talking about that. But a very, very deep putting together of heads, because you see that while the liberals and the newspaper columnists and the mainstream media talk very shrilly about the Maoist armed struggle, the real resistance movements, which are not armed movements, are not prepared to come out and castigate the Maoists and create those divisions, because they know that eventually this entire bandwidth is fighting the same battle. You know, the resistance is against the same things. And so they need to sit together and see what they can learn from each other. And I really think that's very, very important for people to be able to listen, to stop that totally dogmatic language that was invented many years ago, and to listen and to move with the times and to be ready to know how to strategize and how to fight. Because there are new weapons now, there are new ways of thinking, and you have to roll with the punches, you know, you have to. So that, I think, is what, standing on this side of the line, always on this side of the line, I say.
मुझे इस संबंध में दो तीन सवाल है। एक तो दुनिया के पूरे रिसोर्सेस खत्म होने को आ रहे हैं। तो मिंक्विली ने एक किताब लिखी है राइज ऑफ चाइना एंड द डिमाइज ऑफ द वर्ल्ड कैपिटलिस्ट इकोनॉमीज। उसमें इतने पूरा स्टैटिस्टिक्स दिया हुआ है कि कौन सा मिनरल, कौन सा ऑयल, कौन सा और कितने साल में खत्म हो जाएगा, वो पूरा हिस्सा दिया। और इसके वजह से वो ऐसा भी बोल रहा है कि सम रीडर्स उनके लाइफ में देखेंगे कि वर्ल्ड कैपिटलिस्ट इकोनॉमीज विल बी फिनिश। ही इज प्रेडिक्टिंग दैट वे। दैट इज द वन क्वेश्चन। सो इसमें सवाल आता है कि ये जो रिसोर्सेज बॉक्साइट मैग्नीज निकाल रहे हैं उसका और हमारे इंडियन गवर्नमेंट जो पॉपुलेशन है, कस्टकरी पॉपुलेशन है, गरीब समाज है, उसका डेवलपमेंट का क्या संबंध है? ये ओवर निकालना और पॉपुलेशन का विकास का कुछ संबंध है क्या नहीं है? पूरा बाहर प्रदेश जा रहा है, एक सवाल। दूसरा सवाल ये है कि पूरा दुनिया में एनवायरमेंटल क्राइसिस एंड एग्रीकल्चर क्राइसिस इतना जोर से आ रहा है कि जेम्स लवलॉक ने वही किताब में कोट किया है, जेम्स लवलॉक को, ये अर्थ साइंटिस्ट है अमेरिका का, कि 80% दुनिया का पॉपुलेशन वाइप आउट होने वाला है। अगर कुछ चेंजेस नहीं होते तो 80% पॉपुलेशन वाइप आउट होगा। ये इतना दो सवाल है।
नहीं, ये जो आपने पूछा कि माइनिंग का जो रिटर्न्स और हमारा डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स में क्या संबंध है। वैसे आप देखो तो दुनिया के जो देश है जिसमें नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज है वो डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स के नीचे हैं, उनका जो संबंध है बिल्कुल इन्वर्स प्रोपोर्शन में है, क्योंकि ये जो सब निकाले जा रहे हैं हमारे पहाड़ से वो अभी के लिए नहीं और हमारे लिए नहीं, वो बाहर फ्यूचर्स मार्केट में ट्रेड होगा। और जैसे मैंने कहा कि हमारे सरकार का रॉयल्टीज इतना मतलब कोई बेवकूफ़ भी हंसेगा उसको सुन के कि ये हो क्या रहा है। इसीलिए तो एक मधु कोड़ा को 5 साल में 3000 करोड़ मिल सकता है, जो साइकिल में जाता था वो अभी पूरा एक शहर खरीद सकता है। जो ये जो है the economics of it is the most outrageous thing. I just don't like to talk about it because I don't think we should see things in economic terms. I don't think it helps me if you increase the royalty. I don't think that's the way we should look at it, because we are looking at the annihilation of a whole species, of not a whole species, of a whole planet. So to me, the Dandakaranya jungle is like a World Heritage Site. It is a lung. You cannot destroy it. Not the Maoists, not the government. Nobody has the right to destroy it, or the people that live in it and who are fighting for it. That is the issue. So,
see, according to me, there are no governments other than the first EMS Namboodiripad government in Kerala, West Bengal government under Jyoti Basu, Tripura government under the Nirpan Chakrabarti, Manik Sarkar and all, which has done so much of upliftment to the poor, like land reform, right to the tillers, right to the workers, upliftment of the women. Despite all this, I don't know how the Maoists are, even autonomy to the Adivasis. All this has been done in Tripura as well as in West Bengal, and even in Telangana, the struggle led by then communists. Despite all this, why Maoists are directing against Marxists, and that too in combination with reactionary forces? And I would like you to answer.
Well, I think that if you were to go to a place called Chengara today in Kerala, you would have a very different opinion about the land reforms of the EMS Namboodiripad government. One of the first things that the EMS Namboodiripad, mind you, I think that they did a lot of good things. I'm not a complete critic or anything. But I just think in terms of conceptually the way you think, in 1957 when that government came to power, one of the first things it did was to give the Birlas permission to open a rayon factory in Mavur in North Kerala. That factory was given, the Birlas were given bamboo at a subsidized rate of 1 rupee a ton. The Adivasis were allowed to buy it for 1 rupee a stick, 1 rupee a kalm. That factory was given more water, just upstream of Calicut city, more water than the whole city every day for free. It took in the water and it sent out polluted water. It cleaned out the bamboo, it destroyed the fish, it destroyed the livelihood of Adivasis working on bamboo, it destroyed the livelihood of fisher people, of sand miners. It pumped sulfuric acid into the air. It destroyed the livelihood of something like 300,000 informal sector workers, but it created 3,000 revolutionary workers and 13 trade unions among them, because Kerala, being Kerala, you can't have one trade union. So, you see, I think that and all the major communist politicians came out of those trade unions. So, there is a larger understanding in which we have to look at these things now. That the Communist Party has not spread to workers' movements in India. It has lost control of the trade union movements. It has not been able to prevent the dismantling of workers' rights in the neoliberal era. It does not have a different imagination to offer other than the corporatization model right now. So, I'm not saying that the Maoists have the answer, but I'm saying that they happen to be in those places which are under attack now, and they happen to be the people who have always had land at the center of their political movement. And land today is the center of all movements, Gandhian or otherwise, and people attached to the land. So I think this is why I try to keep saying again and again that what we're talking about, there are various ideas that are good ones and real ones that exist, but you need to come out of your dogmas and put them together to really have a vision of another world, because I think we can win this. Because I think this is what is wonderful about this country, that democracy has been destroyed institutionally. Every institution has been hollowed out. The courts, the press, the parliament, all of it has been hollowed out. But people still have that spirit. People still believe that they have rights. They have not been crushed. They have not been broken. They are not backing down. And we must use that energy.
Can I say something? Just a minute. I differ with Arundhati a little bit. It's when the CPM moved away from dogma that a lot of problems began. In fact, it's not. If they'd stuck to dogma, I think they might have been better off. What do I mean? I mean, in West Bengal, yes, you're right. Operation Barga was a tremendous thing. You look at the per acre, the yield per acre for rice after Operation Barga, it increased tremendously. I mean, West Bengal's record of the 90s is remarkable, of course. So it's a major contribution of Operation Barga, because it released the energies, the latent, the energies of the people, and they worked harder. They had access to a lot of credit and other equipment and things like that. But it ran its course. By 90s, you don't see any major reforms on the agenda of the left-wing government in West Bengal. You also see a tremendous increase in membership of the party, because it was a ruling party and it opens its door. All kinds of people were entering. The political education of the cadres declined sharply. This is also the period. I mean, please understand that Lalgarh was, until 2002, they were voting for left-front candidates. It was supposed to be a stronghold of the CPM. So what happened that so rapidly they lost support of the people? Corruption, lack of any. I mean, let's take a small example. Look at the way. I mean, when they moved away from dogma, Singur plant. It's for a small car. Even as a social democratic government, they never raise this issue. Do we require a small car in this country and in West Bengal in particular, or should we give it to manufacture buses for public transport system? The total which is the number of buses which are produced in this country, I think it's not more than 14,000 per annum. Look at the number of small cars that are produced. Who requires small cars and who requires buses? I would have expected the left-front government, even as a social democratic party, to have addressed this issue. Fine, you want to invite an industry to set up. Why do you need to have a small car plant of the Tatas, Nano? Why can't you think in terms of a bus manufacturing? Why could they not have asked Tisco or Ashok Leyland? If Tata was not willing, why didn't they invite Ashok Leyland to set up a plant there? There are many questions like this which remain unanswered. And in fact, the criticism has come from within also. I mean, if you read Prabhat Patnaik's remarkable piece where he talks about subservience to capitalism or subversion of capitalism, it's a remarkable critique of his own party and its policies. and the way in which they have shifted away from many of their fundamental postulates. So there is something to be said about. And I think this frustration, the lack, I mean, people can talk about whether armed revolution will get you anywhere. We don't know. It's an open, as far as I'm concerned, the jury is still out. I'm not going to close it by saying that because they have failed after X number of years or 30 years, nobody has succeeded, therefore they will. I mean, I don't believe in this kind of, this is too speculative and we don't know it. And in fact, in Nepal, if they did not do it, there are a number of reasons for which they chose a different path. It's not because it was just a question of stalemate. The point I'm trying to make is that the left front, which is with its past, with a kind of, I mean, in 66, they were able to push through land reform in West Bengal thanks to the Naxalbari movement, because a section of its own party had revolted against the party leadership. It posed a challenge to the party. If they had not done anything, they would have completely been wiped out. The point I'm trying to make is that yes, left parties have a lot to contribute, and I for one would not like to dismiss them or to ridicule them or to denigrate them. No, they have much. And I believe that but they must also look inside and where they have gone wrong. Why is it that they have not been able to excite? I mean, anybody outside the 3 states, why is it that in Bihar they are not a strong force? Why is it that in Uttar Pradesh they are not a big force? Why is it in Orissa they are not a big force? In adjoining states of West Bengal, if they had been successful in their experiment, if they had shown that it was still possible to work within the constitutional scheme of things and still be able to do something and enable people to prosper and to empower people, really, then many more people have joined their ranks, and they would have been, I mean, people would have looked at the left front as an alternative. Unfortunately, they haven't created that alternative. So when we talk about peaceful path, I wonder, I mean, which peaceful path are you talking about in this country? Even the ML groups which left and joined the parliament and stand for elections, what is their fate? They're nowhere close to what Maoists are. So there is something, in fact, if you go by empirical evidence, I would say the Maoists have shown that you can expand. Maoists have shown that you can consolidate and you can fight the state. Maoists have shown that you don't have to compromise on your fundamental objective of wanting to transform the state and society. It does not mean that we have to agree 100% with them. It does not mean that we have no questions. It does not mean any of these things. But it gives us a space to raise these issues. Otherwise, this whole project to transform the state and society would have finished in this country.
I would like to know, because we have been talking something and a powerful voice of dissent came out. But I feel that because people say that, Arundhati, and you also mentioned about because of this structural change, paradigm shift, it brought in its wake structural violence, which is huge, which has huge implication. But I feel that democracy is hope. Democracy really creates a sort of hope for the people and what we have been fighting for. But now, because of this structural shift, that people started saying, Arundhati Roy, I think, previously said, I fully remember, that there was a criminalization of our democratic space. And other people also say that attenuation of our democratic polity. So, what do you think that under this, because some people say that because this market force or this globalization, which is a very much a centralized structure, and we are talking about democracy, which is very much decentralized. When we talk, recently I feel that this Iyer, that Panchayati Raj Minister, wrote an article in the Indian Express. He was advocating that how Panchayat Raj clause, 6th clause, which gives whole rights to the tribals in decision making, that has been violated. And he was saying that planned and unplanned funds around 50 crores annually can be brought for their development, but it is not being taken care of. So what do you think about, on the one side it is the centralized structure which really dictates the terms, and on the other hand there is a people say that there is a decentralized structure under Panchayati Raj institution which is not functioning, and participation, inclusion, all this is the key for the success of development. I would like to your comment, because development we need, because without development we can't expect that democracy will sustain, although we don't have faith on democracy. It is a very much non-dysfunctional. So I would like your comment.
See, I think this the use of the word democracy to wrap up the capitalist project is not new. Even if you read the debates at the time of the Spanish Civil War, that was what democracy was understood to be, a kind of Trojan horse to smuggle in capitalism. So today, I think what you have to ask, the question we have to ask about democracy is that there was a time when democracy was a real threat to the forces of imperialism, So, for example, if you look very closely at how the Salvador Allende government in Chile was toppled, and what that government tried to do, and how it was toppled, it's an amazing story of how workers tried their best to keep it going, and America and the CIA and all the forces that it used to topple democracy. And there was a time when they were scared of democracy. The imperialist power, America was scared of democracy in Latin America, toppled democracy after democracy. And today, you have wars to put democracies in place. So they say we fought in Afghanistan to place democracy there, we fought in Iraq to put democracy there, because democracy is a shameless suction pump, Everything has been hollowed out. So that's what we have. That's the kind of democracy we have. We should be ashamed to call it democracy, where when I was traveling in Tamil Nadu, it's not just that the political parties pay the media for good coverage. Now they also have to pay the media so that they don't get bad coverage. Then the good coverage is an extra fee. Everything is just a transaction. I mean, you have a judge in the Supreme Court who says, when he's listening to the Vedanta case, that one of them said, tribals have no place in this case. And then the other said, this Sterlite is a very good company. I have shares in Sterlite. We won't give it to Vedanta, we'll give it to Sterlite, when Sterlite is a sister concern of Vedanta. Now, and he's the Chief Justice now, and he's known as a very honest man, So what we're talking about is people in power whose imaginations have been totally colonized. It's not about corruption alone, it's about a colonized imagination. And look how interesting it is that people who don't win elections, our Prime Minister has never won an election in his life. But he is there taking the decisions. The people who win elections stay out of power so that they can be the good guys. The people who don't win elections are the Prime Minister. And if he doesn't take the decisions, the Supreme Court takes them. And then if you criticize them, you go to jail because it's contempt of court. So you see how the machine has been set up, and you just keep going round and round and round in that. Like those motorcyclists in those old circuses who used to go around like that in those big globes. You feel like that. You go, and the higher speed you go, the safer you are. And it's like, I often say, I feel like when I was in school, I once stole all the carrots from the garden of my Malayalam teacher and then planted the tops back. And for a long time he was watering those plants and wondering why is it not, So every institution of ours has been uprooted and hollowed and planted back. And we keep all our energies trying to get them to grow, but they don't have any roots now anymore. If India was a democracy, a real democracy, if poor people believed that they could go to a court for justice, or they could ask their local MLA, or they could go anywhere to ask for justice for some wrong that had been done to them, there would still be a Maoist party. It would probably have 5 members. It would not have any influence if this was a real democracy. But people know that it isn't. It's every time you withdraw those institutions further and further away from poor people, every time you make it clear that justice is only for those who can afford it, you are creating the conditions for what ought to be an overthrowing of the state. Because a state like this, which tolerates this many dead, which tolerates these levels of corruption, which sells our mountains and our rivers, which disallows us to speak, it surely ought to be overthrown. If a state like this, or reformed or overthrown. Or we are supposed to stand up and clap every time they mine the hell out of the Andhra-Karnataka border. Say, oh, it's okay, the Reddy brothers really should own those borders.
I have 2 questions for Arundhati. First, as an ordinary person who perhaps lacks a sense of humor or is ultra-sensitive, and second, as part of a media, corporate or otherwise. First question is, help me understand this joke. You are talking like a Gond tribal, Gond Adivasi. Help me understand this joke. You are talking like a Gond Adivasi. When you are addressing his question, you refer to him as you are talking like a Gond Adivasi, and some of us actually laughed at him. So explain the joke to me. And the second, as part of corporate media or otherwise on a lighter note, is how is your definition of corporate media different from Maoist sympathizers? Both sound like Bushisms to me, with us or against us.
Okay, am I saying that the person who said, why are we doing all this work? Why are we running around? Why are we, doing this? To me, I thought there was a great amount of wisdom there in saying, that's why I said you're talking like a Gond Adivasi. I don't know why people laughed, because... Can I explain our laughter? I think it's because perhaps middle class people feel superior when they are actually not, when they actually become people whose brains have been colonized by television advertisements and have stopped asking themselves, why are we working so hard so that we can buy our new TV and our new car? And when someone actually asks that question, I think it's a profound question. It's not a profound question in the forest, but it's certainly a profound question in the city. Because if people stopped, a lot of formally the green anarchists asked that question. Why should everybody be turned into a worker, into a wage owner, into a slave of the system? And that is why the resistances that this world cannot deal with are the tribal resistances, because they are outside of that system. They don't understand them, So there's that was that. I think the corporate media is a little bit different from Naxalite sympathizer, because it does have a pretty precise definition, which is that a media whose turnover comes almost entirely from corporate profits, from corporate advertisement. I think most newspapers, more than 99% of the turnover comes from advertising, not from people buying the newspaper, and in TV it's even more so. So structurally, it's a corporate institution. So you call it the corporate media. It's a very common term. That doesn't mean that all the journalists who work there are, I know that many journalists try very hard to get some leverage, some foothold, But I'm talking about the ownership structure. In fact, I strongly believe that the media should be asked to declare the structure of their finances, because you must know if 90% of a newspaper's money is coming from Reliance, it's important for us to know it, and to know that before we assess its opinion, because it's not a neutral opinion then. That's being peddled as a neutral opinion, but it's withholding information from the public, Naxalite sympathizer is a meaningless word, because what does it mean? I mean, firstly, the meaning of Naxalite is unclear, and the meaning of sympathizer is unclear, and both together compound their lack of clarity to a point when it's ridiculous. You know, like we don't know who is a Maoist when they say we must wipe out the Maoist menace. If there are 90,000 women that belong to the Krantivasi Adivasi Mahila Sangathan, are you going to wipe them out? You know, who is a Maoist? Is somebody who joins the Dalam because he's or she is fighting, doesn't believe that her village should be taken over, but doesn't know that ultimately isn't really fighting for the takeover of the Indian state. Are they Maoist? How do you define what is a Maoist? Is every person who's a member of the party a real Maoist? You know, we haven't talked about that. Like, the fact is that tribal people in this country have a history of rebellion that far predates Mao. If they didn't, they wouldn't exist. They are a different society, and they have fought for the right to be that. So, we cannot just say that the Maoists represent the tribal. They both, at the moment, there's a convergence of interests. When those will diverge, one doesn't know. But at the moment, there's a convergence of interests. But let's not forget that tribal people are not just some zombies who are being manipulated by some Andhra ideologues. They have their own history of resistance, a very formidable history of resistance that far predates Mao. As for sympathizers, I don't know how you define it. I mean, does a sympathizer mean you agree with everything they do, or some of the things they do, or is there a percentage? You know, it's just all of this is meant to criminalize democratic space. All of this is meant for that. You know, the dictum of sent out by the Home Ministry, it's meant to terrorize people into shutting up, into not expressing their feelings. Because on the last day that I was in the forest, we were listening to the BBC in Hindi, and it was a program on Naxalites, and the person who was running the show said 90% of the people calling in were saying that they supported them. And they understood what they were doing. That's a terrifying thing for any government to hear. So you better shut the taps, better keep everyone quiet.
This would be the last question. We have to close.
It is fair for Manmohan Singh and P. Chidambaram to envision an India in which 85% people would be in cities. Because how long we want our people to be in jungle and not avail the standard hospital and standard school education and speak like or write like English like you and I. And the second question I want to ask is related to the political electoral reform of proportional representation which has been introduced in Nepal, through which actually Maoists could get over to power in the first place, which is not there in our country, and which is there in many countries including South Africa, Germany, maybe New Zealand and Switzerland, where proportion of the votes you poll in the election, you get proportion of seats in the parliament, and given that kind of electoral system, even the LGBT group, that is a lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gay group in Nepal could get one seat in their Nepal parliament, which even if that kind of electoral system can be there in India, then Maoists would easily walk away with 50 to 100 seats and get political space to voice their issues, and which can be a tool to address all sorts of issues. We don't need a Maoland, we don't need projects to die down. It would have a instrumentation to solve all these problems. And one last point, how the way you romanticize the village life or the tribal jungle life, it is not an easy life. The rivers you talk about, that water doesn't come in the tap. That is not also polluted water. The life expectancy there is not high. The education level is not that high. When villages are transferred into towns and cities, I guess it is a good for life. I don't understand, if I and you can be educated in good school, go to foreign land, why not our people in the jungles?
First of all, I think it's absolutely outrageous for you to say that I have not talked about the malnutrition or the water situation or how many years the Maoists fought in the forest side by side with women for rights among tribal people. If there's anyone who never romanticized it, it was that. And all of it is in what I've written. So either you haven't read it and you're just like parroting what everyone says or whatever. Anyway, forget that. The other question is, just days after I came out of the forest, I think Gautam, you were at Jantar Mantar and I had come there. Jantar Mantar in Delhi is where people are now allowed to protest between 9 to 5 because of the Commonwealth Games. There was a group of 3,000 slum dwellers from Bombay who had gone there to protest the fact that they had no rights, no water, no ration card, no security, no school, nothing. I walked past those people, and I think you have to understand that those Adivasi people are fighting for their rights to stay in their jungle. I'm not saying they should stay in their jungle. They want to stay in their jungle. But why can't you give them schools in where they live? It can happen. Oh, come on. Don't be absurd. It's just that the schools are full of policemen. The schools are full of policemen. There are schools, but they're full of policemen. And the fact is that this idea of development is what the problem is in the first place. So if you want to have 85% of people in the cities, you should have cities where 85% of the people are using 15% of the water and 85% of the water is used by 15% of the people, where most people have no rights at all in the cities. So that is the situation that we have. You can't tell people what they should want. You have to respect what they do want. They have every right to come out of the cities out of the jungle and migrate. No one is telling them to stop. So why haven't they come? No one has asked them to stop. People want them to come. They go every year as contract labor, as road labor, as mirchi pickers. Why do they come back? They don't sit there and enjoy the benefits of the city. They all come back. Why? And the issue of the elections, what you're talking about, that's an important thing, because today if you look at the mathematics that underlies the elections, you see that this government that is in power today, which all of us think of as a government with a comfortable majority, compared to what goes on these days, it has a small requirement for coalition. It only had 10.6% of the vote of the population, because that's how the mathematics of electoral democracy has been made to work. Many of the MPs won with 10% of the vote of their constituency. So for them to claim that they actually represent a majority is totally wrong. And that's why they are mostly millionaires, the MPs, because they can just buy that. They can just buy the coverage. They can just buy the media. They can just pay off people to come and vote. A Dalit MP friend of mine in Tamil Nadu was telling me, MLA, he said, I can't go to my constituency anymore because people have just been turned into beggars. They just come there and say, if there's a flood, give me a TV. If there's no flood, give me a TV. Give me a bicycle. People have and this whole thing, the whole way in which the state is now beginning to function, like the Employment Guarantee Act. You can't criticize it because it's helping people, but it's firstly creating a tragic situation where it's taking everything away from people and then throwing some crumbs at them. Then you can't say don't even throw the crumbs, because that's a terrible thing to say, but it's reducing people making people into zombies, crazy. And they don't even get that money anyway. People have to immolate themselves to even say that we are not getting the money. So I think there are very serious questions here but fundamentally, I think this question about the cities and jungle is a very, very serious question, because you have to understand that the questions being raised here are about our ideas of ourselves. Who are we? Maybe it's us that needs to be reformed, not the Adivasi. Maybe it's the doctors and the lawyers and the teachers and the writers, all of us. I might speak fluent English and so on, but I consider that just like a Maoist has snatched an AK-47 CRPF and is using it. I have snatched this, but I'm using it against the people who gave it to me, because I don't think that this is going to get us anywhere.
I just want to add one thing. I find this whole argument about development, it's a very interesting argument, and it's been hammered at us again and again. Chidambaram, in his interview with Tehelka, in fact, pointedly said, do you want the Adivasis to live without shoes, without schools? Do you want them to continue to live there? This is an old debate, he said. He says, no. This is the only way in which the Adivasis will get schools, will get better, they'll get jobs, etc. But it hasn't happened. So today, for anybody to come out and say that this is what development is doing and the Maoists are thwarting it, or all this resistance is trying to stop it, we have to first stop and ask ourselves, is it just, are they being stupid are they being stubborn unnecessarily, or is it based on people's own experience? And secondly, I think there is also a point that one has to say. When one talks about, development, yes, people should have what you and I have, the same education, the same place where they live. But that involves that we should allow those kind of our houses to be open for people to come in and live there in the same. Would we like it? We want all the privileges that we have to be retained, and then we, as Arundhati says, we just want them to dangle the carrot of development, to say that this is what you can get if you follow our path, if you believe in development and our policies. I think this is not going to work, because people haven't had it. In Delhi, you're talking about 85% of the people move to the city. But look at the reality of today's Delhi, where you have a prestigious event like Commonwealth Game, which has been set up and for which 30,000 crore rupees have been spent. And what was the condition in which the construction labor worked and lived? They were like bonded labor. It was the bonded labor that has created, this is like feudal days, where the serfs were brought in by the feudal master to set up stadiums or spectacular, events for which their services were used. It's the same thing our government has done. This is a government project. They could have emerged as a role model for rest of the society, if I would have believed in it. They haven't done it. It took a PIL to move them to do it, and even then they're doing their utmost best to evade the responsibility. So you have the greatest lawless force as the government itself. What do you expect? The point therefore I'm trying to make is that it's all right for you and I to believe in development. I don't believe in people to be reduced to remain in this under-consumption society that we have. No. This contrast between high consumption of the 5 to 10% and the under-consumption of 80%, it's unacceptable, and it must be changed. How do you bring about this change? I'm afraid that peaceful means, we have seen it work for 63 years. They haven't brought that about. Surely that empirical evidence should convince us that we have to explore other possibilities. It need not be armed, but let it be something else. But please come out and give us those alternatives.
We overshot time by a complete half an hour. We have to end. I would like to thank you all for coming here on behalf of myself as well as CPDA, and same way we thank the speakers.
How do you manage this?
on all of you, on your behalf. Thank you.
Okay.